Fall of a Mighty Empire, Book 1, written by Charles Fox Champion. Co-written by Bridget Weldon and Kyle Kaffler. Edited by Feature the Bug and Kat Davis. Copyright Charles Fox Champion. Any reproduction, in part or in whole, of this story, its images, characters, or any other contents of this book, without the express written permission of the copyright owners above. The unauthorized reproduction, in part or in whole, of this story will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. This includes, but is not limited to, physical, digital, and or any other form of distribution or development of this story, for reproduction or distribution. Any characters, places, names, and situations portrayed in this story are based in a fictional content and do not represent any actual people, places, or events. Any resemblance to anyone or anything living or dead, in the present or past, is not intended any harm to the person, place, or thing that may have been used in this story. All others are purely coincidental. foxknightteam@gmail.com. Warning: this book contains content that may be considered offensive to some readers. Acts of violence, sexual themes, alcohol abuse, drug use, and tobacco use are within the pages of this book. If you are sensitive to such content, be advised to read at your own discretion. This book is not meant for younger viewers. Parental guidance is advised. All realities exist within the confines of our minds. Just as a word can only hold its meaning if you believe that meaning to be true, so too does a world exist if you believe it to do so. Part 1. Prologue. Before we can begin to tell you of our tale, we must first speak of another place where there existed a realm. No, a reality so vastly different from what you would expect. So much so it is hard to believe such a place exists, but I assure you, it does. With skies that were hazy orange from clouds glitter with rust and land dotted with thick forests of glimmering jewel formations, the world had no water of any sort. Instead, in the low regions, gas clouds gathered in such thickness you could cup them in your hands like wisps of raw cotton. This was the closest to the sea that existed. Upon the lands, many manner strange creatures emerged to crawl, float, and stride. Their forms and diet were peculiar to our standards. Many of them feasted upon the very crystals that so dominated the otherwise barren world, and there were others who feasted upon the scaled flesh instead. Then there were the strangest of all, the terrifying gas dwellers. Compared to the land creatures, the gas dwellers were less known. Most were referred to little more than horrors of the deep. None of them were nearly as adept as those on the land, for from those of the land came the higher races, the dragons of this world, creatures that walked upright, formed civilization, and dominated reality with fists of iron and cunning minds. Ruled over by their mother and queen, they were the Kalsharth, so named after the founding mother of their world, Kosh-Kalvir. Even with these qualities, there was one skill that set Kosh-Kalvir's people high above all other races in this world. They had the ability to change their very form. It was from the essence of their world, and that which they consumed, they drew a mystical energy, an energy that, when accumulated to a high enough degree, could be used to alter their very genetics, thus changing their own form. It was from this strength that the attention of the gods was drawn. One in particular was a relatively young and ambitious entity had set their gaze upon Kosh-Kalvir's people. A task requiring the very strength and fluidity presented by the Kalsharth had drawn them forth. Their deceptively simple goal was to reunite the Keeper of Knowledge and become a Keeper of Choice in their own right. To do this, plans were made and alliances were forged between the entity and Kosh-Kalvir. The Queen of the Kalsharth was to become the new knowledge reborn, while the entity Entans're secured their own goals in the process. Thus it is here where we shall begin, be it only for a moment before proceeding elsewhere. For though this tale is incomplete currently, it shall be whole in time. Thus, we continue the story at hand, as this world and that to follow share a common path. Though for one the end is set, the other remains to be seen. As such, I present to you the beginning of the fall of a mighty empire. Kalvir emotions at war within her scale breast, she hastened up the crystalline stairway, her outer demeanor calm and dignified, though within was anxiety, restlessness, elation, and more were all near blinding to her senses. Bliss blurred into despair only to rise again. The internal sensations conspired to distract her from her ultimate goal, for there would be no further delays. The hour had come, and she was certain of her preparations. The planned retribution for her folly of ages past was to be amended, and she could barely calm herself enough to wait the further moments remaining in her game. So many inept, tedious little rules, restrictions, and handicaps, all so maddening she had been ready to cry out in the tantrum of her relative youth. For too long she had been forced to watch anxiously until she could step in to guide the Jarl'Skarna's course. Then from there guide them into their role as the pawns in what was to be a one-sided battle, one against an enemy she would soon create. She, Entans're, would soon be the guardian and steward of chaos with knowledge to be reborn at her side from one of her choosing. How she longed to skip forward to celebrate, though she held no control over time itself. Thus in her spiraling depths of thought, fantasy, and emotion she all but flew into the room. Only a brief warning allowed her to fully regain herself as she heard the greeting. "Tell me, Entans're, how does our preparations fare?" The deep feminine voice of the much larger dragon met her ears. All emotions forced away in the instant of her entry as she smiled silkily and replied to the question, completed at last. "Your children but await you, my dearest Jarl'Skana," joining the autumn-toned dragoness on the gemstone balcony. Entans're, or Entans're as the Jarl'Skana knew her, gazed out over the hordes of dragon-like humanoids standing ready for battle below. Though the vast majority of them were simple in form, they were not much more than horned lizards standing upon bipedal frames. There were those who were more advanced in their design. Even they, however, paled in comparison to Entans're and Jarl'Skana, the autumn dragoness with her sharpened hide of armored spikes. Far more utilitarian in design, aimed at tactical purpose, made her look formidable at first glance. Entans's form, on the other hand, was elegant and smooth even down to her spiraling antler-esque horns, which she was also the only one to possess flight-worthy wings known to Jarl'Skana's people. Glancing over to admire the thorn dragoness, Entans're found amusement in the tiny jutting pikes which grew in the base beginnings of small wings. The Jarl'Skarna's ruler had begun the process of their growth after finding an attraction to Entans's, though hardly the only copied feature, given the hefty though useless spherical appendages she grew on her chest that mimicked her own. A fascinating ability of the race that had first enticed her eye, which had pulled her from other matters quite frequently. "You find distraction at such a crucial time?" Jarl'Skana commented in a quiet rumble upon noticing Entans's gaze. "Nothing begins until I permit," the smaller dragoness confidently replied. Glancing up to meet Jarl'Skana's stern amber eyes, she added, "However, I suppose after such delays as we have undergone, I can admire your growth post-excursion." Her attention again upon the events that had so recently been a distraction as she asked, "Are you indeed set to commence?" Once begun events shall not cease until one side or the other has emerged victorious. A sideways glance to the other dragoness having her continue, "Either you shall be as a god or shall cease to." Expression hardened as she faltered and further reviewed those waiting below. Now for the first time she found herself second-guessing her choice of champion, a process that had begun to happen more often than she would ever admit. While there was no denying Jarl'Skana's strength and brilliance in battle, she knew all too well the pull of chaos, plucking at the strings of fate, a sign she had quickly learned in her pursuit to prove worthy to wield stewardship. Thoughts shifting back to the events unfolding below, she smiled inwardly. Soon, quite soon, she had no doubt she would indeed wield the mantle. The notion brought an upward surge of elation within her being, as she had to calm herself lest she betray the reaction. "Your thoughts might be occupied, Entans're, but mine, however, are not. I and our children stand against any challenge you bring forth," Jarl'Skana firmly stated. Her words returned Entans're to the moment once more. "Indeed, I'm sure." Turning her gaze toward the towering crystalline dwellings on either side of the amassed army below, she commented, "There will likely be many reconstructions required by the end of this. I wonder, you speak of such things as reconstruction at this moment?" Jarl'Skana's question cut in sharply. Turning her gaze to her smaller ally, she caught sight of the delicate earring set on Entans's left ear. Reaching out to touch the topmost piercing and letting her finger trace the thin chain down and up to the other, she cruelly jabbed, "You do not even adorn yourself for battle. What other expectation should I have had?" Brushing off the harshness of Kosh Kalvir's tone, Entans're waved it away with her hand and replied, "You are far too anxious, my dear champion. It shall serve you ill if you are to succeed. To focus instead on the future, even upon such a precipice, as this is vital. So, too, are symbols such as these gifts to commemorate our union." Her clawed finger reaching to touch the 3 piercings of her left ear, she recalled their presentation and meaning. Outer connections of the union, while a central jewel piercing rested between the simple golden jeweled hoops. Their glory and unity in marriage. Not letting her reflections distract her, she turned her fiery eyes in Kosh Kalvir's direction and added in a faintly darker tone, "To be in such a rush as to even interrupt my speech is the foolishness of a hatchling." The taller dragoness lip curled in a growl. Entans're smoothly transitioned her demeanor as she added in reply to Kosh Kalvir's angered stance, "Your rage is better suited elsewhere, my dear. Yet you stall." Kosh Kalvir roared accusatorially, "Indeed. So I might know your mind and better determine if perhaps you are not yet the shorter dragon started." Grabbed hold of Entansry's shoulder and spinning her so their eyes met before she could finish her words, Kosh Kalvir blazed, "Do not dare utter a further delay. I will not call off this joining of my children. They have come from across this world to be at my side, and I shall not weaken myself as to have them step away." Removing Kosh Kalvir's hand with ease despite the otherwise steely grip of the much larger dragoness, Entans're again turned away to stare at the city of crystals. It was clear that all her concerns were warranted. With how late in the game, there was nothing else to be done but wait upon the final outcome. The smaller dragon internally reviewing their conversation. She was more than confident her champion would not do as well as she had hoped. "I stand beside you as an equal, Kosh Kalvir. Do not make the mistake that it is due to anything but a choice by which I do so." Sighing and looking to the taken aback dragoness beside her, she continued, "I shall consent to your wishes, however, and commence. You have more than proven your worth against all others for this challenge." For the most part, her words drifted off at the end as she stepped away from the balcony. "Malthana, now we depart from the world of the Kalsharth, and it is to Malthana where we continue our tale. A world crafted for a purpose of old. Within, it is much like the earth of which you know and is familiar. It too contains a healthy range of flora, fauna, water, land, and air. However such similarities do exist, there are those differences too. The creatures of which you might already know rose to stand upon bipedal frames. They built cities and developed languages based off ones given to them from one of ours, and created commerce and technologies too. Be it primitive to our standards, it was still there. None of the human or primate races exist within this world, for they were purposefully excluded from its design. Instead, we move onward to a new focus of history, well into the development of Malthana's cultural existence. We find a curious group. For rabbits, all young in their years, have gathered with unwise purpose. Little do they know the impact of their childish venture, though they shall, as will you, despite its seeming insignificance. It shall become clear as to its purpose. Romastica tiny rabbit feet pitter, pattered across the cobblestones of the Romanesque-like streets. Turning the corner, the young bipedal rabbit, known as Lagirus in Romastica, darted into one of the dwellings, pulling back hood of her cloak as she pulled its string, releasing it, tossing it onto a square wooden peg on the wall. She hurried into the back. She was met by more Lagirus. "Did you bring them?" A Lagir Blackfur excitedly asked her newly arrived companion. To her side, 2 other Lapine girls, their colors respectively of gold and brown, eagerly watched the fourth, one of pure white, fur, enter the room. All 4 of the girls stood upon humanoid frames. The defining difference from other races came in the form of furred bodies, complete with rabbit heads and tails. Having gathered together in the large pantry with bated breath over the parcel their friend carried, none of the girls to contain their excitement. "Indeed, was a simple matter, too," the white Lagir answered. Her loose Romanesque tunic shifted as she swept the curtain back into place to cover the doorway behind her. On her hip was a courier's bag that the others kept glancing at while she closed the distance between them. Shifting the focus of her gaze, the golden of the 4 asked with a sly expression, "So, what sort of payment did you have to render?" All 4 broke into conspiratorial giggles at the insinuating question. "It was hardly taxing," the white Lagir replied with a small grin, which faded slightly when she added, "I don't think they really wanted them there actually. W, what do they do to Nilla? The brown asked with her head tilted questioningly at how her friend had spoken of the bag's contents. You never did give us full details when you told us about them earlier, the black logger added. I'm not certain. I just know the knockoff that was offering them to give them to the Emperor as a gift. The Emperor didn't think much of them, so he had them tossed away into storage. And well, the guards didn't feel it would hurt if I took them. The white logger, Tanilla, replied with a shrug. Her hand dug into bag and pulling out the 4 scrolls. Wait, you mean they're knockoff scrolls? The brown cried. Her hand covered her mouth as though she had uttered something offensive. The others glanced back as she flushed and continued in a more hushed tone. I knew you said they were special. But knockoffs? They might curse us instead. You heard about the endless dead, right? PFFH, I doubt the truth in those stories, Persephone. Tanilla scoffed. I mean, if that were so dangerous, the Emperor wouldn't have let them be taken, right? Certainly they were escorted from the Empire before they could cause trouble, but nothing was done to them, so the scrolls couldn't possibly be tainted with a curse. The gold and black girls nodded their heads in agreement with Tanilla's words. I suppose... The brown Persephone began only to be interrupted by her black-furred friend. What do we wait for then? Let us see what they summon. I'm certain they'll have the handsomest of the gods in the temple carvings. The black logger's gray eyes gleamed at the prospect her words conjured forth. You believe so? Then I cannot wait. Come on, Tanilla, pass me one, the golden said. The other 2 also nodding in anticipation. All of Persephone's concerns were forgotten in the surrounding wave of excitement from her companions. All right, hold on. Oh, Persephone, you still don't have someone courting you, do you? Tanilla asked her friend. Blushing, Persephone shook her head and answered, No, I do not. Why? There's one in here with a love binding. Giggling, Tanilla asked, What do you think? An immortal courting you. And I'm certain they must be handsome, too. A small grin spread across Tanilla's muzzle. Really? Well, all right. Pass it over. A fresh surge of excitement took over her as Persephone laughed. I simply cannot wait any further. Though a new thought occurred, and she felt the need to ask, It will be a he. Yes. I'm not certain. Oh, but think about it, Persephone. You could end up part of a legend, dating an actual god. A round of the others let out eager breaths. Tanilla swiftly passed them each their scrolls, saving one with an orange satiny seal for herself. All of them in a matter of moments tossed away the colorful seals and unrolled their various scrolls as their eyes anxiously scanned the contents. So, what does everyone think? Are we ready to begin? Tanilla asked. I'm not so certain. Mine looks like I must create some sort of circle on the ground, but I cannot entirely read it. Parts seem written in Romastican, but then others appear as symbols I have never before seen. The Golden said somewhat uncertainly. I wouldn't worry about it. I'd wager it a strange knockoff custom. Nickelty dismissed with a giggle. Oh, well, all right. Unless you want to trade Nickelty. The Golden's eyes watched the black and white logger rather nervously from over her scroll. Sounds fine to me, Tabintha. Mine appears oddly anyway. I think this one summons one with horns, and I don't care for horns much. Last time I was with a guy with horns that got a nasty scare from it. Nickelty commented as she transferred her scroll to Tabintha in exchange for the Golden's. Hey, I like your scar. Gives you character. Tanilla winked as she reached over and pinched Nickelty's ribs. Ha! Yeah, you did. Couldn't get you to quit playing with it last time we're fooling around. Nickelty giggled. I wonder if that means it summons a Bioxel. Tabintha cut in as she almost moaned. Her young body quivered excitedly with the idea of a mythical biped. Oh, a romance of the ages. Her eyes took on a dreamy sort of cast. You and your large fellows, Persephone teasingly jabbed. Well, anyway, come on. Let's stop worrying over how girthful yours will be, so I can get mine out. I cannot wait. Can you imagine my parents? A giggle escaped from the notion as she went on. Well, they have been saying I should start meeting other people. That's true, Tabintha replied, looking at Persephone as she turned back to the rest of the group. Very well, I'm ready. The logger laughed as she continued. Though we know someone who desires their burrow filled. Everyone too excited to even titter at Persephone's resulting blush as they all stared at their scrolls in hushed anticipation. All right, everyone, let us begin together. Remember now, say everything just as a scroll does. Don't skip a thing, Tanilla directed. Her words, though, contained a hint of uncertainty toward the end. In near-perfect unison, the 4 girls of around 14 to 16 years in age began reading their various scrolls. Around them, air currents fluctuated in temperature. A small wind began to surround Nickelty, while all movement stopped in the area of Persephone other than small sparks of energy popping randomly. Nickelty grew increasingly nervous as she let her gray eyes drift up to the others, though they did not dare stop, since they seemed unconcerned, Tanilla being the first to finish. Her reading barely had a chance to be completed before a thick ball of smoke formed in front of her. A long cream tail with darkened tip flickered from the dense haze. Too caught up in their own scrolls, the others failed to notice Tanilla's summon emerging as a seal-point Siamese attired in a Victorian-style dress that hugged her well-fed proportions. Caught off guard, Tanilla could see her summon about to speak, when the Siamese's attention turned towards where Persephone's summon had just emerged, forming the log-ear's chest as a glowing harpoon-like spike jutted out. Each link in a chain materialized one at a time like fireflies flocking to where it was appearing. At the end of the gilded tether stood a towering, smoky-colored wolf with blazing eyes and red accents on her shoulders and forehead, which were the only markings not obscured by the wolf's long curled hair. She was adorned in wealthy romastic attire. The wolfess opened her eyes as the bind faded from view, as it was a chaotic mess of deep red curls trailed down past the wolf's ample back, was much in contrast to the tight blonde curls coming down in fat spirals to the Siamese's shoulders. Both were still quite out of place by their bearing and unworldly appearances. The wolfess was looking fit to attend the emperor's palace, while the Siamese were nothing any of them had ever seen before. Despite that there was clear disappointment that could be seen on Persephone's face at the female wolfess, she had called forth, "What mess have you dragged me into this time?" The wolfess groaned in disdain. Her eyes became slits in betrayal of the fury her tone hid. The wolfess' already fiery eyes seemed to ignite around the angrily slitted pupils. "Don't look at me. This is probably your doing, Fleabag." The feline hissed back, without any pretense of her emotions. "A real mana, such as I would be aware of occurrences under my command. So, do explain how this could possibly be my doing." The wolfess smirked as if she had won the argument. From hearing the words of smirk came over the feline to compete with the wolfess. The Siamese's cold blue eyes noticed a frightened-looking brown and white log-ears watching them. The audience only seemed to heighten the pleasure for the Victorian-garbed feline. "Correction. You were a real mana. Take another look, tail-wagger. You couldn't jump your immortal essence to another dimension to save your miserable hide. You are nothing but some dimensionally stranded realmling now. Still immortal, but bound to one world." "Oh, how the mighty has fallen!" The feline sneered with a sense of glee. "Oh, you think so, do you? I dash." Her words failed her as the wolfess for the first time since being summoned. She took heed of Persephone. Her angry eyes softened almost at once. From flames to slumbering coals, her irises ceased to move and settled into a simple fiery coloration, which would have seemed normal if not for the ranging hues. "I am most apologetic, my dear. I didn't mean to sink to this feline's level before you. Would you care to go elsewhere before she fills the area with further spite and ill fortunes?" The wolfess soothed, the feline's eyes flashing with the crackling of ice crystals glaring at the wolfess. Only a hiss able to be heard from the infuriated Siamese. Unable to reply, Persephone's wide brown eyes turned towards where the Binta was finishing her own scroll. The sound of dashing hooves filled the room. Lights went out in a flash as screams filled the air. Nothing of what Tabinta had summoned could be seen. Yet around them the room became turbulent, and the others recognized the screams of Nickelty's. "Nickelty, is that you?" Tabinta cried out. The feeling of warm breath on her soft golden pelt drained her already strained sense of calm. Was that the name of the one withdrawn from this realm? An unfamiliar voice inquired. Air ceased to move in the otherwise silent pantry as the lights returned to the room. "I do greatly hope you don't mind, dear, but since that one was so hasty in dragging off your friend to their dimension, I thought I'd return some light to the area," the wolfess said softly to a panicked Persephone. My, you really are merely a whip pup, aren't you, O mistress of chaos? The feline again sneered, a heavy smirk on her lips. Off with you to crawl after yarn or service your new mistress. I haven't to care for you now, cat. The wolfess commented offhandedly, her primary focus upon figuring a way to calm Persephone. Hold on. You're the one who summoned me. The feline's ice-blue eyes turned towards Tonilla. Yes. W.H. where's Nickledy? Tonilla replied fearfully, as she was doing no better than the other two remaining log-ears. What do I care? She evidently made a poor gamble. The feline replied with a shrug, further displaying her lack of interest in Nicklety's fate. Always a suave one, aren't you, Clarison? Despite having not turned from Persephone, the wolfess again addressed the logger. Never you mind her. She's been bitter for a great many millennia since her last bet went bad. As for your friend, it would appear she was pulled into a dimensional rift between realms. Though I know not entirely where she went. Granted, she's the one who summoned it. The incantation should have contained all necessary information on the matter. An elegant shrug of shoulders followed her words. Honestly, I'm surprised she didn't use a protective circle or some other mechanism of the sort when performing her ritual. Then again, I suppose she might have meant to not do so, the wolfess pointed out. I realize I should be more concerned for Nicklety, but see, could someone please do something? Mine really looking at me strangely, and I don't think they planned nice things for me, Tabintha whimpered. On either side of her stood two Chupataris of a more sinister style, each sniffing at her and licking their lips. These differed from a standard Chupatari in that, unlike the strongly built golden-colored deer-like steed creatures they bore much fiercer designs. Their antlers were jagged and sharp in contrast to standard smooth branches. Their pelts were a murky dark jade, and when they darted out their glistening black tongues, their menacing fangs came into clear view. Even their very forms were almost a throwback to what one might have imagined crawled out of the primordial beginnings of Chupatari ancestry, with stocky builds more like a hunter than the prey. Needing not even glance back, the wolfess waved her hand dismissively. Hardly. They just wish to devour you and add your essence to their brood. They wish to do what? The three log-ears cried out, only to have Tabintha rush over to her remaining friends, while the left Chupatari asked in an almost feminine voice, I don't suppose either of you might know why it is we feel blocked from doing so? One of the two Chupatari asked with feminine voice. Permit me to see. The scroll Tabintha had dropped after the summon disappeared from the floor and into the wolf's hand as she spoke. Unrolling and reading over the contents, she surmised aloud. It would seem there is a no-harm clause to your contract, so to speak. Rather, an interesting sort of indentured servitude awaits you instead. Far worse than the one you've lodged complaint over my holding actually. Fiery colored eyes peered at the two Chupataris, rather calculatingly, from over the parchment. An uneasy glance shared by the pair, they looked at Tabintha and snorted unhappily. The one on the right stamping their hoof, it asked with masculine counter the feminine on the left, What must we do to fulfill this indenture hold? Nothing too special. The wolfess began only for Clarison to cut in. This is a waste of my. Her face contorted at the words she nearly uttered. She instead altered her words to say, Am I finished here? Or must I listen to this fallen real manna further? Careful of your words. I am certain she is waiting for you to dismiss her, so she shan't need fulfill her end of the contract. The wolfess cautioned. Gaining a pleasing hiss, she again addressed the Chupataris. As for your end, I fail to see much aid needed considering my standing with you at current. Silent words passed and a meaningful shared glance when the feminine Chupatari replied, You won't have any further issue from us on the matter of our care. They will be yours if you wish it. Just tell us what we need do. Tabintha hardly failing to notice the Chupataris licking their chops as she clung to Tonilla. You need but await her dismissal of you. Until such as that moment, you are to obey her every whims, the wolfess replied, much to the evident annoyance of the pair. Surely you could hasten such events? The masculine of the Chupataris hinted. I certainly could. Hesitance for the first time entering her eyes, the wolfess glanced at Persephone and added, Though I doubt my beloved here would much care for my releasing you to dash. No, please, if you can get rid of them, do it. Tabintha pleaded. Are you dash? The wolfess began only for Persephone to cut in. Get them out of here. They're frightening her, the logger demanded. Very well, then. The wolfess replied much to everyone, excluding Clarissant's eager anticipation. In a quick eruption of flame, the wolfess burnt the scroll. Always with the needless theatrics, Clarissant muttered from where she stood off to the side. Her gaze in a way only a cat seems able to pull off. She watched without evident interest as the Chupataris grinned through fong-filled muzzles only to descend upon the Lagiers. A wall of flame shot up before the 3 Lagiers. The wolfess warned off the Chupataris. It would be most ill-advised to overstep the generosity shown to you. Sharing another meaningful glance, the female of the pair asked, "Are we not permitted to take what is owed since the contract is concluded? I shall not deny you that which is yours. However, I would advise you not take so liberal a step toward my mate," the wolfess cautioned. A flick of her wrist swept away the flames. The male of the pair jerked his branching horns back as Tabinta was sent flying toward the Chupataris. Her friends were only able to stare in horror as their companion was torn apart in a matter of moments. Then, just as quickly as it began, the pair of Chupataris were gone. Tabinta no more than a traumatic memory, with not even a drop of blood there to mark her passing. "How could you allow that to happen?" Percival demanded, a mix of fear and anger in her voice as she regarded the wolfess. Outrage winning out over any traces of fright as she demanded, "Fix this! Do something to bring Nickel-T and Tabinta back. You're supposed to be an immortal, aren't you?" The brown Lagier was unable to process what she had seen enough to realize there was not any possibility of return for Tabinta. "I truly haven't any ID, Dash," the wolfess started. Cutting off the distraught wolfess, Percival fumed to Clarissant's amusement and her friend's further unease. "I don't want to hear it. Just do it." Tears streamed down and mat the fur of her cheeks as Percival choked out. This was supposed to be amusing if it even worked at all. Try and console Percival through an embrace only to be shoved away, the wolfess quietly murmured, "I will try to regain your friend. Tabinta, though, will no longer be Dash." "No, don't do anything. You've already done enough. Just be quiet," Percival ordered before turning to sob into Tonilla's shoulder. How pitiful! The poor puppy was scolded by her mistress. Can you even imagine how the great and mighty Keu's name would be brought low if the Empire could see you now? A whimpering shell of their once great deity. Clarissant mocked with a snicker. The wolf is too concerned with Percival to pay her any mind. "Hey now, cease that. That isn't very nice," Tonilla scolded Clarissant before adding, even if what she did was inexcusable. A mixing of emotions crossed the white Lagier's features at having also scolded her summon, let alone defending the other. Turning to face the white Lagier with a piercing glare that quelled any rising confidence Tonilla might have built, Clarissant growled, "Just because that fleabag has to follow orders hardly means I must as well. You summoned me so you can make a gamble with your betters. That is the only thing I must do is play bookie for you." Seeming ready to spit, she added in disdain, "As wretched a prospect as that is, more so since you haven't even any real worth to wager with, or the obvious lack of. Be mindful, Clarissant." The wolfess softly growled from where she now stood to the side as she continued, "I'll not permit your further rudeness toward my dearest friend." "Oh, I'm so scared of the little realmling wolfie," Clarissant said with a feigned gesture of needing to faint. The Siamese smirked at the wolfess. "What shall you do? Not chase me into another realm? Or perhaps keep me from uttering your true name as easily as you can mine?" Enton dashed. "Do not mistake my lack of desire to leave my mate's side for a full diminishing of my abilities, Clarissant. On that note, last I checked, your master doesn't take too lightly towards his underlings being caught and made into mortal bookies. That reminds me. However, it should be interesting to see you check in, won't it?" Only receiving a hiss in reply, the wolfess could not even bring herself to smirk at feeling Percival's ire rising, wishing to ask despite already having a good idea of what was wrong. The wolfess found herself not needing to give voice to the question, thanks to Percival answering without provocation. "Be quiet already. I can't stand hearing you any longer. Either of you," she cried out. Turning back to Entans're, once more she continued, "You've been nothing but trouble from the very start." Stamping her long foot on the ground, the Lagier rattled on. "First, you aren't a handsome suitor, as I desired. You probably even keep them from me with how you look." Percival gestured to the wolfess' voluptuous hourglass figure. What need have I even for a woman? I have lost 2 dear friends, and all you can do is argue with that Jarl. You don't even dash. Percival scolded as she was cut off. Who are you calling Jarl mortal? Do I appear to your dim eyes as the pathetic excuses of feline elegance which your ridiculous romastica possesses? Clarison hissed, only to gain a stern glare from the wolfess in warning. Receiving no actual words, the feline regained her boldness and cruelly continued, Ah, so you truly can't disobey, can you? If that's love, perhaps I should find a few thralls of my own. Despite her inability to speak, the wolf managed a smirk that made Clarison near growl at the smugness of it. Turning her glare to Tonilla, Clarison straightened and cooled instantly as she offered, in the interest of moving matters along. So I needn't further dwell in muck. Perhaps you have a wager you have always wished to make, or better yet, I could offer one of my own. Shying away at how the feline smiled toothily at her, Tonilla asked to Percival, What do you think? I'd sooner she be gone, but I don't want to end up like Nickelty and Tabintha either. Glancing to the silence, wolfess Percival debated asking her opinion on the matter a moment before answering, I don't think it would hurt, but it might be better not to. I mean, what was your scroll supposed to do again? Share her friend's discomfort being on the spot. Tonilla replied, From what I could tell when the knockalls were describing each one, this is supposed to grant a person who reads at the promise of great fortune. Perhaps I could see if she could bring them back. Or you could make a wager that's better suited to a clever mortal, such as yourself. Clarison hastily cut in despite the smugness radiating from a wolf. Then you can't bring them back either? Tonilla sadly asked of the feline. I never claimed such a thing, but why waste your bet on matters so silly? Surely even a mortal such as you could find something more rewarding to wager on? Clarison coaxed, her gaze though not upon Tonilla, but the wolfess instead. Smug enjoyment well taken from the canine's inability to cut in. Catching Clarison's less than subtle gaze, Tonilla hesitantly replied, I'd better think on it. Turning a pleading eye to her remaining friend, she asked, What are your thoughts? I don't know if I dash. Quickly chancing a glance at the increasingly impatient feline, she leaned in to whisper to Percival, I don't quite trust dashed. What's not a trust? Clarison cut in smoothly, ushering Percival aside with a sweep of her gloved hand. The feline came to stand at Tonilla's side. Keeping from touching the uneasy logger, the feline whispered, You have but to make a wager, and I'll be gone. Neither of us really wanting to stay here longer than I need to, and I am a rather busy real mana. Considering I still am one. Casting a haughty glance at the agitated wolfess, she smirked and added for good measure, It won't even be as hazardous to your health as something that mutt over there might do. I can promise you that. So, I just wish something and you'll leave? Without hurting me? Tonilla hesitantly asked, Why ever would I want to hurt you? Clarison replied with a less than comforting smile. The tips of long fangs just peeked out from beneath her lips. She quickly diminished her smile and started to step away. Of course it isn't a wish. Her features showed her distaste of the word. She clarified. It isn't free either. You must pay the price of a wager. Anything you desire will be yours if you so win. But if you aren't interested, the Siamese gave Tonilla a sly glance from over her shoulder as she completely turned her back to the loggear and smirked at how the wolfess could do nothing but watch and glare. Tell me, is what she's saying true? Percival suddenly spoke up, much to Clarison's shock and the wolfess' immense relief. Clarison isn't telling you everything. Entans're corrected. Cutting off further explanation, Clarison hissed, Mistress of Caus or not, you are not to interfere in matters of luck. Oh, mighty Entans're dashed, you were never given permission to speak my name, nor interfere with my words underlying of luck. The wolfess interrupted before Clarison could finish. As I was preparing to speak, my dearest, she again continued despite the enraged feline. Her task is to provide a wager to your friend. However, your friend sets the wager, both what is to be bet upon, and what will be placed up should she win or lose for both her and Clarison. However, with that said, Clarison is well within her rights to offer advice, but cannot do more than that to sway the outcome. Turning a flaming eye to the glaring feline, she took her turn to smirk and added, though it would be wiser by far never make use of her services. "If you're quite finished, Mistress Cayuse," Clarison near spat, "this is between me and that mortal there. You had best not interfere, lest you invoke the wrath of luck." The terrible hissing of her voice reduced the log-ear back to quivering. Unflinching, the mistress of Cayuse answered smugly, "That would require you to first explaining how you became indentured to a mortal in the first place. Wouldn't it? I'd rather suffer his displeasure than pass up the chance to see you squirm beneath his wrath, you haughty excuse for a mutt." Clarison scoffed. Smirking, the wolfess tilted her head in acknowledgment and remained silent, lest she actually step over the bounds. Regaining herself with obvious difficulty, the feline smoothed her attire and demanded of Tonilla, "Name your wager, so I can be done with you." Gulping down her rising anxiety, Tonilla hesitantly looked between the two summons and nervously replied, Licking her lips, she went on, "I think I had best hold off for the time being." Noticing the way the feline flinched at the word time, she hastened to join Persifa. Recovering from the unknown blight, Clarison hissed below her breath and said, "Fine! Then call me when you finally decide what ridiculous wage you wish to risk comes to you. Luck be with me, you'll pass long before you decide upon your choice." A large plume of smoke balled outward from the feline to fill the room. It was clear, with an elegant wave of the wolf's hand, to reveal Clarison had vanished with nary a trace. Also just the theatrics indeed, Entans're muttered to herself. Coughing harshly at the remnants of smoke in their lungs, Tonilla managed to recover just enough to recall the fate of her companions. Hastily checking herself, she breathed a sigh of relief. Both lagomorphs much relieved to have suffered no worse than a brief coughing fit after the feline's departure. "It's over," Tonilla breathed as she hugged her friend close, tears finally breaking free from her blue eyes as the loss of the others crept into her breast. Barely containing herself, Persifa hazarded a glance up at the anxious wolfess, who still watched her intently. Anger rather than sadness filled her as she glared at the Cayuse mistress and demanded, "What do I have to do to get rid of you?" "Persifa, who knows what she might do if you speak to her in such a way?" Tonilla quickly cautioned, very much aghast at her friend's audacity. Realization dawning, she added, "Remember what that Jarl said. She's mistress of the Cayuse. Do you know who they are? Even the Emperor would be blessed by the goddesses of Romastica to have one of the Cayuse family pay visit to his palace villa. I don't care who she is. Tabintha and Nicklety are gone because of her." Persifa shot back, cutting her friend off. Tears escaped down her cheeks. She continued, "Besides, I've never heard of a Cayuse having the ability to perform the acts she has." Pointing an accusing finger at the wolfess, despite her friend's shock, she managed to sob out, "The only worth you have is if you cease to be." "Persifa," Tonilla breathed, her arms closed around her friend's shuddering shoulders. Taking comfort in the warm arms holding her tight, Persifa could not help but be drawn away by a lack of response from the wolfess. Glaring at the mistress of Cayuse, Persifa ordered, "Say something already." Bowing to the log-ear, the wolfess quietly replied, "I am most apologetic, my dashed. I care not." Persifa fumed, her body pulled from her friend's embrace. "Tell me how to be rid of you," the log-ear insisted. "You must either pass off the binding chain which connects us, or have it fall upon the ground to be free of me." "There is but one other option, though I desire not to speak it," the wolfess sadly answered. Excitement swelling in her breast, Persifa demanded, "What's the last way?" "For you to perish." The wolfess lowered her ears. Much of her bravado draining, both log-ears gasped and clung to one another. "TH the other ways." "How do I do that?" Persifa quickly asked, her rounded brown eyes staring intently at the wolfess, despite her fear. Sighing, the wolfess moved her hand to her chest, and from it the bind was made visible, a dazzling golden lynx. The chain grew link by link until it reached Persifa's own breast, as if fireflies were gathering to form a chain. Eyes going wide, Persifa grabbed at the chain to find it solidly connected. The links, while light, were indeed provided substance in her hands. Panic spreading at the apparent impalement, she at last realized the lack of blood or pain. Tearing her eyes away to look at Tonilla, she could see her friend was at a loss. "Only you and those of a higher awareness may perceive our bond. Only one exception exists, and that is if your intent is to transfer our connection to another," the wolfess explained, her tone dismal despite her obedience to try and please the log-ear to which she was bound. Sighing, she added in accordance with what she'd been ordered, "Our link may be ended by pulling the base of your link from your bosom, drop it upon the ground, or thrust it into another two. Be rid of me." Needing hear nothing more, Persephone hesitantly at first grasped the link snuggest against her chest and began to withdraw it. Confidence grew as the smooth pike slowly came into view. She pulled it with a strange sense of displacement, which the log-ear girl relished. For though the void within grew, it felt strange, and much like a phantom limb, as she knew her freedom was at hand. Beside her, however, Tanilla was unable to see what it was her friend was removing. However, she was able to see the change coming over the wolfess standing before them. The Kayu's mistress, as Clarison had called her, was growing taller. The deep bloody red hair writhed about her shoulders as though alive. The wolfess eyes were what really made the white-furred girl quake the most, as within them flames burst into life around white-hot, slitted irises from a strange depth the likes of which she could never begin to describe. It was as though fires were being rekindled, and with those flames a disturbing change of expression. Whatever the apologetic wolfess had been when summoned, she was awakening, and it clearly deeply confused her. Panicking, Tanilla took hold of Persephone's hands, and before her friend could have time to relish the removal of the bond, the white log-ear thrust Persephone's hands backward to again plunge the unseen link into its home. However, in her blindness, rather than settle comfortably within the invisible void, it tore through above and right into the area of Persephone's spine. This caused the brown log-ear to cry out in excruciating pain. Wind knocked out of her by the action, Persephone fell back into the waiting arms of the wolfess. The wolfess had moved with unnatural speed to circle behind the brown log-ear. Only when she had regained herself enough to see who was holding her did Persephone tore herself from the wolfess and demand of Tanilla, "What reason have you for doing that?" "It feels as though I've swallowed an egg or stone." She was changing. Tanilla answered uneasily despite being glad to see her friend unhurt by her hasty actions. "What? But..." Looking over her shoulder with renewed concern, Persephone moved further away from the wolfess to rejoin Tanilla's side. What was she doing? The log-ear asked of her friend, watching the wolfess with cautious eyes. "I don't know." She grew, and in her eyes, shuddering, Tanilla found herself unable to continue. Her focus again on the now more normal-seeming eyes of the wolfess, all flames having been quelled by Persephone's link being restored. Even the pupils were rounded as with other wolves she had known before, including her height restored. If not for the red patches of fur on the wolf's shoulders and forehead, Tanilla would never have known her from another Hikibi of Romostica had she not seen recent events. Gulping and turned to her friend, Tanilla at last pleaded, "Please, Persephone, whatever it is you were doing, do not release her. I don't trust she would keep from causing harm to you or others should she be released." Had you seen the fires in her eyes, as I had, you'd feel the same. Shuddering and hugging to a much more concerned Persephone, she whispered. It was as though the abyss had opened up around the centers of her eyes right before my own. New tears seeped out to further mat her fluffy cheeks, as Persephone could handle no more. Turning away and pulling Tanilla with her by the hand, she whimpered, "Then let her stay here this eve. We'll figure out what to do tomorrow, after Nicolti and Tabintha. Now this... I don't even want to think of this any longer. Please allow me to stay with you this night, Tanilla." "Of course, Persephone," Tanilla answered at once. Nodding, Persephone pulled aside the pantry curtain. Thankful none had been in the home but Tanilla and her lost friends. Then, on a last whim, she turned to look back at the strangely forlorn-looking wolf and asked, "Tell me your name, so that I might know how to address the blight that ruined my life." Ears lowering defeatedly, the wolfess quietly answered, "Entans're." Gasping at the girls went pale before they fled from the room to leave the wolfess to her thoughts. 10 years later, near Yenna village north of Romastica, in the harsh tribal lands of the Yenna, the Romastican Empire set into motion a plan to conquer the world. One such stop was the Yenna, which is the hyena people of the north. In the distance, overlooking the plumes of smoke that rose from the Yenna huts, the Romasticans waited. Wind blew softly to rustle along the gray fur of the majestic woven commander. He surveyed the vast landscape spreading out before him. His large golden eyes took in the spreading burst of life that had come to the foreign lands. A truly blessed sight to both he and his men after the long campaign spent in the snow that had previously consumed the land, a fact he would not soon forget, as they were ill-prepared for the white menace. Inhaling fresh floral air, he idly stroked at the short ridge of fur along the back of his Chupatari mount. Finely polished armor caught the rays of the sun in each intricate facet as he was cast in a shining radiance befitting a god of war. "Sir, the troops have gathered and await you. What are your orders?" A young hawk-like humanoid called a Tychrian asked. Much like his commander, he too was a resident and in the employ of Romastica's grand military force, though he had Tychrian of the bird people, while his commander of the Hikibi, which was a canine person. Stirred from his thoughts, the Hikibi general calmly replied, very good, Zephyricius. Tell them to set up camp. We rest here for 3 rills." His eyes, even while he spoke, never leaving the direction. He had been surveying his surroundings, knowing he was to be there for 3 days. "Yes, Sir Commander Lefindra," the hawk answered. His taloned hand came up to his chest in salute, as he made to leave only to pause. Turning back, he asked, "Sir, do you truly trust the Shades will be able to rid us of all the threats within?" The Tychrian inquired. A bit pride filled him as a grin formed on his muzzle. The Wolven commander looked down to the Tychrian. "I'm certain of it." Turning back to the field once more, he continued, "Schizopacusi has never failed me." The Tychrian joined his commander's gaze as he could just make out a village stretching across the horizon, an unwelcome sight that made the avian have to suppress a shudder lest it be taken note of. Outside the Yenna village, approaching the Yenna tribe rattling along a roadless path, an older transport cart made its way toward the very village that had so plagued the Romastican forces for the previous 5 years. The driver rather apprehensive as he solemnly made his progress. He noted that even the thick hide of Gallifra, which was a creature akin to a cross between elephant, tapir, and bear, hitched to the wagon, was unsteady, though it seemed to the driver a natural response given the creature, and its kind came from a region, their thick, strong builds along with intelligence making them an easily trained and useful pack animal, which the Romastican forces quickly adopted into their service. It was their version of a beast of burden. "I know, we probably won't make out alive," the Hikibi driver quietly commented to the Gallifra, the animal snorting back in an almost sentient fashion. Glancing away from the Gallifra and ever-looming village, he looked back to the 4 cloaked figures in the rear of the cart, none of them speaking. They all appeared as much awaiting execution as he, though despite this, he knew above all these were the Empire's greatest hope against the Yenna, the wretched hyena people of the land, who, while small in number by comparison, had thus far held off and at times overwhelmed the trained warriors of the Romastican legions. This in no small part due to their massive stature and strength, for each Yenna was taller than most Romasticans, and stronger than their best warriors in a comparison of physical strength. Shaking his head and holding back a sigh, he turned his attention back to their destination after a sharp jolt shook the cart. Cursing beneath his breath at the uncivilized brute's lack of roads, he calmed himself. In his mind, he again went over the words he had left his family in a letter should he fail to return. A mental checklist had him wondering if he had written it well. Would his parents be proud or horrified that he had chosen to accept such a mission? He knew the answer. He also knew in the end they would be proud to have a son as he. Certainly there had been others, some as elder and senior, by many years to step forward. Nevertheless, he had been drawn of those who volunteered, those who had actual families of their own, or were only sons of their parents had been cast aside. Only those whose families could survive the loss, or were of many sons, were even permitted to apply. Straightening up as a final jolt signaled their entry into the village, he dismissed his thoughts and held himself proudly. His end, or not the gawking and mocking calls of barbarians, would not scathe him as he directed the cart into village's center. Surprisingly, no Yenna ventured more than an insult in his direction, even as the largest hut in the village came into view. Supposing that their ruler had at least that much control, he pulled to a stop and whispered to those behind him, "All right, let's go." Then, speaking to himself as he hopped down from his seat, he muttered, "The goddess's blessings be upon us. Surely she knows we have need it." Not needing to look back to see the cloaked figures had fallen in behind him, the driver bravely strode up to the massive brute, standing by the hut entry. The Yenna's sheer size was intimidating enough, The male, like all others of the tribe, wore only a loincloth and nothing else. A strange sight to see indeed for a Romastican, other than the size or lack of dress, though the Yenna standing guard was enormous even by comparison to other Yenna, despite the very fact he was male. For, as a general rule, the Yenna were ruled by the women of the tribe, which in most cases they were stronger, larger, and more aggressive than the males. This did not, however, mean the males were pushovers by any stretch of the imagination. What struck the Hikibi odd was the male that stood before him was much larger than what he had come to know of Yenna males before. "We are here to address your Kavra in the interest of diplomacy," the Hikibi stated with all the bravery he could muster despite the towering face 3 feet above him. The 8.5-foot tall," Yenna said more than asked. His deep voice almost rumbled within the Hikibi and his cloaked companion's chest as he spoke. The Yenna crossed his arms with his muscles bulged from beneath the unkempt fur in silent challenge toward the Hikibi's resolve. Clearing his throat to calm his nerves, the Hikibi could certainly feel the fur on his back rise and how other Yenna were slowly creeping up. Blessedly, his Romastican armor of leather and metal kept the reaction from being too easily noticed. The encasing by the moment feeling a comfort despite the large, muscular Yennas encircling him and his companions. "Indeed. Now, if you would be so kind as to announce us to your Kavra," he tried again, only for his formality to be dismissed as a joke. The Yennas broke out into laughter from one end to another. Their actions began to fluster the Hikibi, as he could not help but feel offense at rising from within. "Burapishka Roma," the huge Yenna stated with a sneer as he stepped aside, so a female Yenna could come forward from within the tent. The new Yenna, while indeed smaller than most other Yenna by a head, was muscled from head to toe on an impressive frame. Her black was hair tied back in the style the Hikibi knew full well as one worn when ready for battle. Even as she bore no weapons, he could feel the control she had over the far larger male, who moved back in respect to her. "Wha, you on with the Kavra Romastican?" she asked with quiet dominance. Her very voice gave an air of authority over all she addressed. Suppressing a gulp, the Hikibi met her dark purple-brown gaze and answered the formidable female. "We are here on diplomatic relations with your Air tribe." Mustering up what bravado he could despite the unimpressed Yenna, he scornfully demanded, "Now, will you bring us to your Kavra, or not?" Too slow to move out of the way, the Hikibi found himself seized up from his chest plate by the behemoth male. The Hikibi's ears filled with the metallic, crunching as the front of the plate conformed to the incredible grip holding him. He struggled to gain freedom and breath. Behind him, the cloaked entourage stood silent, though they shifted beneath their concealing garments. Taking no heed of any but the brute held the Hikibi angrily growled the order. "Jarl'Skana need no here unteach to Kexiatsu, Burpishkas aroma. Unkf." The Yenna female snickered from beside the much larger male. Waiting until the Hikibi had been dropped to land hard on his tail, the female continued, "Yolsi aroma." Snapping her fingers, she motioned over another Yenna from the tent behind them. "Ganensk," the new Yenna replied with a faint smirk. "Take Emni Kavra," the Yenna female ordered. Her arms crossed as she watched the Hikibi limp forward with her companions trailing close behind. The last of the cloaked group vanished into the hut as she managed to catch sight of a fluffy black and white tail peeking from beneath the garment. "Jarl'Skana, that a good talent?" The male Yenna asked as the visitors walked out of earshot. "Practice your Romastic and Sadirsk, even if you don't use it for them," Jarl'Skana corrected as she finally turned to look his way. Gaining the respectful nod she expected, she went on, "Keep watch of those in the heavy hides. I doubt Romasticans are foolish enough to try diplomacy any more." "Jarl'Skana, I will," Sadirsk answered before heading into the large hut. Yenna village Kavra's tent. Meanwhile, within the tent, the small group of 5 were shown to stand before the Kavra. The Yenna ruler's hut was both home and throne room in one. To the side was a bed of hides that were strewn out in a large pile big enough for several Yenna to sleep upon, while the throne of hides and bone took the center stage. 5 guards stood in a semicircle about the throne with their lethal bone weapons ready at their sides, each in some fashion sharing characteristics with the Kavra they protected. They too were adorned in various ornaments, some more than others, yet they all shared a tattoo with common characteristics in them upon their arms. However, these too varied, with the cavers being the most detailed and intricate of those gathered. The caver herself was covered in decorations of bone and twisted metals that had been acquired from fallen Romastican soldiers. Her thick mane of dark brown hair was beaded and braided in a primal crown atop her head. Her loin was far more intricate, with ornate designs and patterns. From either sides of her hips beads and bones hung down, tracing her ample hips upon the leather straps. Around her neck was fingers, bones, and small broken weapons of fallen Romasticans she wore as trophies. Her chest was bare as she sat with little modesty to their exposure. Her pelvis and inner thighs, too, were not well covered despite the gaudy loincloth. It lay as if she did not care if anyone saw. More to the point, almost as if she was showing off as a matter of pride. Littered upon her body was scars that told of past battles. Adding to her presence was a pungent smell that was near vomit-inducing even from where they stood. From her throne she remained the only to seem unaware of their having visitors. When the Romasticans were stopped, their escort explained to Cavra their reason for the intrusion. Cavra, discorumova Entans're by Jarl'Skana. Looking over with a smirk to Cavra, finally took heed of the new guest to her hut. Sharp purple eyes, like those of Jarl'Skana, studied the group with mild amusement. I'm a Romastican diplomat here, on orders of Commander Fetchierda, Lefindra of the Romastican Empire. The Emperor wishes to reach a peaceful resolution to Dash. The Akebi was explaining when the Cavra angrily cut in. Who do you think you is to talk when I haven't said you're allowed? The Cavra snarled. My apologies, your majesty. I Dash. His words again quickly interrupted. The Akebi gulped as several guards pulled their bone weapons. The guard nearest him brought her deadly sword to his throat threateningly. What would you dare call me? The Cavra growled, gulping as the blade pricked him to draw a scratch of blood. The guard and Cavra sharing a malicious smirk between one another. The Akebi began to explain. I called you your majesty. It is a title of honor and respect. From behind the cloaked, followers again shifted, their stances prepared to defend. Nodding for the guard to lower her, weapon the Cavra decreed. Well, very. I see Romasticans still too thick. Heh, your leader must better teach his diplomates. Around her snickers rose up from those Yenna gathered. Even the Cavra bore a smirk at the affront she had inflicted. Not permitting the quickly flustering Akebi the chance to retort, she went on. I shall forgive this cycle. Whelping wasn't good on this Roma. O'Hare-wise, he'd have been whelped stronger. Make a good mate and stay at home with pups. Laughing and waving him off, she at last ordered, I not have offense, but not again. You and any other Romastican you bring will call me Cavra for your respect. I know weak male emperor. Fighting an angry retort, the Akebi swallowed and replied, Yes, Cavra. I apologize for the error. Now, what you want? The Cavra asked, sitting back in her barbaric throne. Rubbing his throat to stem the itch that had sprung up, the Akebi continued, I am here on behalf of my Emperor Leondios. It is the Emperor's wish to discuss the conditions of your surrender. Laughing loudly at the notion along with her court, she stood from her throne and walked up to the Akebi. Coming close enough for her rank breath to fill the Akebi's sensitive nostrils, she snarled, Your Emperor will see Jarl'Skana take my throne before I surrender to any, let alone a scan of a male. Leaning down to meet her sharp gaze with the Akebi, she added, You have until another rill to leave my land. Straightening back to her full height of over 6 feet, she caught sight of Sadir's standing quietly to the side, smirking with a wicked glint as she ordered the Yenna behemoth, Take these. Roma's to one of the empty slumps. They stay there for this night. Grinning outright, she continued, They'll go at morning. Cavra, Sadir's replied as he grabbed one of the 4 cloaked and spun them with a sharp pull of their shoulder. The Yenna male grunted his order to the group, all following him with the one who'd been grabbed, visibly rubbing their shoulder from beneath the cloak. They were led back outside. Harsh sunlight stung the Akebi's vision before his eyes could adjust. He blinked and was at last met with the sight of their ruined cart, splintered with litter the area in sure sign of the Yennas having wailed upon it with weapon and fist. Only the fate of their Galliffer was uncertain, though doubtful the animal had fared much better. All around spots of fresh blood could be seen upon the ground and the remains of the cart. What have you barbaric beasts done? The Akebi exclaimed. rushing forward to what remained. He could only stand uselessly by wringing his hands. Those behind him casting about, they seemed to take in every detail of the wreckage. Trembling with rage, as this finally caused him to snap, he made a shout at the amused mass when he was roughly plucked from the ground. Jarl'Skana, evidently tired of waiting, tossed the Akebi over his shoulder and started off for their destination. The remaining four had no choice but to follow along lest they be left behind. The slough came into sight as they were taken to the run-down hut. Several holes gaped in the roof where native birds had taken the fibers for nests. To leave it in such a state, the Romasticans were glad the snows had gone. The location of the poor excuse for a shack was an area of the village the Romastican forces had managed to charge through at an earlier excursion, the result having been for the Romasticans to be soundly driven back. Evidently the Yenna hadn't seen much need to rebuild, and instead had spread further out around the ruined area. Not wanting to waste time, Jarl'Skana tossed the Akebi through the open doorway, letting the others move past to join their comrade. Jarl'Skana grumbled in warning. Kavra won't care Skaromaji, skin fair leave it, flashing them a wicked grin, while licking his lips the behemoth walked off, taking the departure as her chance. One of the four cloaked figures flipped back her hood and rushed to the Akebi's side, her brow furrowing concern as the skunk woman, known as a Strupaw, knelt down beside him. How fare you? Her delicate hands took hold to help him to his feet. The dazed Akebi nodded to the Strupaw. I'm well enough, he said once he had his footing. You had best be as full of talent as they say. I want them to pay the debt they've made, he growled. His hand scratched at the growing infection on his neck. The area had become visibly red despite the fur. All in due time, stated another of those cloaked from the side. Pulling back his hood to display his possum features of the Marshall people, he asked, Where are our supplies? The last two followed suit to reveal themselves as another Strupaw but male, and a Rendell woman, which is to say she was a raccoon person. The male Strupaw hesitantly as he answered, I think they were on the cart, sir. However, as you've always reminded Skitsa, have a backup plan. Female raccoon chimed in. Drawing back her robe, she revealed small packs strapped to her person. Pleased by the thankful turn of events, the Marshal praised. Very good, Deloria. Taking no heed of modesty Deloria, the Rendell removed her cloak entirely and secured over the hut doorway. Next she unfastened the packages which had been so tightly strapped on. She dropped them along with her remaining clothing upon the filthy ground. Letting his attention rove over his companions, the Marshal could see the male of the two stray paws staring at the ground. The white of his stripes showed hints of increased redness below the fur from a blush. Suppressing a smile at the Strupaw's reaction, he commented, Tilke, still overly bashful, I see. Hey, you could say that. The male Strupaw sheepishly answered as he continued, At least you don't need to worry about such since Commander Lefindra chose you, Skiz. Chuckling and patting Tilke's shoulder, Skiz replied, Perhaps. Hardly means I fail to have my moments around Dash, as though it weren't bad enough to be at the mercy of the Yenna. Must we hear you talk of a roving eye? The Akebi cut in sharply, much to everyone's surprise. It was not my intent to imply such burschen, Skiz calmly replied, unable to keep from again scratching the cut on his throat. The Akebi bitterly accused. Be you a hero of the Shade Forces, or not fetchier to Lefindra, will be better with another Akebi than Marshal. He should dash. Politely interrupting, Skiz quietly pointed out before the tirade could continue. Fetchiurta's choice is his own, and I made no sway one way or another. I am, however, eternally appreciative and flattered by his choice. Should he ever choose another as his mate, then that too shall be his decision, and I shall respect it as he is my superior in so many ways. Any retort he wished to make cut off as Bershin opened and closed his mouth for a moment before finally lowering his ears and deflating. I meant no disrespect toward Commander Lefindra or his choices. It wasn't my place to. Bershin tried to backpedal. I understand. Skiz cut in pleasantly with a smile flashing Bershin's way. Breathing a sigh of relief at the situation having been dealt with, Deloria couldn't help but admire Skiz's skill in handling himself. Smiling, she returned to the mission at hand and grabbed up the supplies. Choosing to start with Tilke since the pack marked with his name was on top, she passed it over to the flustered Strupaw. Snickering at the way he tried not to stare at her bared form, She flicked her fluffy tail in his direction when doling out the remaining supplies to her companions, a chuckle being shared by the female Strapaw and Skiz at Tilkie's expense. They started in on the contents of the pouches. Tilkie a little more slowly than the others, though he did at last follow suit. Within the packs held fur dyes with the colors of random Yenna patterns, as well as prosthetic muzzle and tail attachments. The former crafted from various plant dyes, while the latter were molded hide-shaped, and cut, then dyed with the same hues to soon coat the Hikibi's companions. Setting down his pack since he'd ensured everything needed was accounted for, Skiz directed to the others. Since Deloria started us off, everyone aside from Bershin, lose your clothing. It won't do for us to be figured out, because we couldn't dress as a Yenna. Skiz's hands already undoing the clasp of his cloak while he spoke. He was pleased to see even Tilke doing as told without too much hesitation. It was thus starting with Skiz, they worked the dyes in and secured the prosthetics so as to have them blend. Any extra for being trimmed or sculpted into a more Yenna appearance. His tail at last being wrapped about his center. A loin hung then from the front of his furless fifth appendage, the effect being as though he had skinned the tail and used it for his belt. Dyes were used on his tail as well. They made the tail darker and more brown for a tan effect. For his furless feet and hands he had to put on gloves and socks of an odd design. These two helped finish the effect for any who were not paid too close of attention. Next came Tilke. The same methods was used on Skiz, being repeated for the male Strapaw, though his tail fur was shaved down and wrapped just as Skiz's tail had been. Tilkie's was a bit more natural in looks given the actual thinness beneath the fluffy fur. Humph! The trials we shaved for take for our empire, Deloria muttered as she had next shaved down the female Strapaw's tail. It'll take us cycles to grow back our fur, she complained. At least the dyes will wash out, the female Strapaw replied, having to keep from shrugging lest she disturb the work being done. Ah, but it will look odd to see a Strapaw such as you, and Tilke seeming more black and white Jarl. Patilii, Deloria laughed in return. And you a masked one, Patilii shot back. Smiling to himself, Skiz glanced up from his work to see Tilkie going about his end with hesitation. Dilta, is something the matter? Skiz asked rather pointedly. No, sir, just. Would you take her front, those Skiz? The Strapaw shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't hard to see he had been skipping about to mainly focus his work upon Patiliai's face, neck, and shoulders. I'll do it, Deloria interjected with a snicker. Her hands took the dye Tilkie was holding and pushed him off with a bump of her bare hips. The Rendell was rather charmed by the almost innocent nature of her fellow shade. Perhaps I can help show how to properly rub dyes in later, she quietly added for Tilkie to hear more than the others. A near red spot of stripe developed from the ensuing blush. He mumbled his thanks to Deloria. Then he made to hurry from Patilii when the other Strapaw caught his hand and whispered so only he could hear, Is something smell wrong? I washed the best I could before this mission. The blush in the white of his stripe grew stronger as Tilkie shook his head and whispered back, And no, it's not that Patilii. I. Unable to handle the awkwardness further, Tilkie again shook his head and pulled away, which caused Deloria's hand to slip as Patilii was pulled to the side. She had not having released her male counterpart's hand fast enough. Ack! Tilta! What did you pull her for? Deloria scolded and sighed. Now I have to fix her bosom, lest one of those barbarians out there actually notice. I mean to. Tilke started only for Skiz to cut in. Forget it, Tilke. We don't have the time. Go make certain none are lingering too closely, the marshal ordered. Grateful for the reprieve, Tilke quickly nodded and went to the doorway to peek outside. It's not so bad. Patilii excused once everyone were fully upon their task again when she continued. Jiffa could have been on this mission. Laughing, Deloria nodded. Then we really wouldn't have been able to finish getting set. On the mission, ladies, Skiz corrected. His glance shifted just enough for Deloria to catch his meaning. In the corner, Bershin seemed to have taken on a skeptical expression over how the shades were cutting up with one another, though he was appeased by their getting on in silence from there. At last it came for Deloria's turn. Patilii and Skiz took the job since neither trusted Tilkie's ability to handle himself any better than he did with Patilii. Unlike the others, though, Deloria's tail required mainly a trim and some extra fluff toward the end rather than an actual prosthetic replacement. All the shades were adorned in what made them look very young Yenna, which given their less than pronounced musculature, though the dyes had been done with some hint of shadows where toning could be better seen. They took on the final touches when Skiz passed them each a bone dagger. Be very careful. It has been reported that they put some kind of flesh-eating stuff on the blades. A simple scratch can kill you, Skiz warned. The weapons they were using were collected from various skirmishes with the Yenna. The weapons were not the best, but would do. More so since young and old Yenna carried arms from what had been observed. Deloria and Patilii both had their hair done in braids, mimicking those ornate plaits of the female warriors they hoped to resemble. All right, Patilii, Deloria, make for the larger males. Anyone who looks a threat. If you can target first the one we saw outside the Caver's hut. Even he looked like he holds sway. Skiz directed. Then turning to Tilke, he continued. Tilke, you and I will go for the larger females. We're taking out anyone who might cause a problem for our men. It's time for Romastica to finish this, so we can get ours people back to their families. Shouldn't be a problem, Skiz. Patilii and I can deal with a few oversized barbarians, Deloria replied with a wink to her superior. God is blessing on your mission. However, this is where I get the abyss out of here. Bershin stated, already moving for the exit, his form covered in one of the discarded robes. A pack with surplus supplies could just be made out beneath the thick cloth. You should stay here until nightfall. You'd be less liable to draw attention. Skiz replied firmly, his tone unwelcoming to dispute. Pleasing for a moment, the Hikibi made no further move than to grudgingly lean against the wall. Skiz turned back to his shades. Time to move. May your blade always strike true. The others nodded as Skiz was the first in the hut. Soon he was followed by Deloria, Tilkie, and lastly Patilii, each departing in an interval of a minute before the next exited. They swiftly set out to blend in amongst the tribal populace. Patilii, however, was unable to see around a nearby hut as she rounded the corner, bumping into Sadirsk. What you doing here? Sadirsk demanded of the strange-looking little female. His dark brown eyes seemed to pierce the disguised shade as he took in the spot of her chest where the die had been hastily fixed. Scrutiny not stopping there, he could tell her nervousness. It didn't help the childish size a decent explanation, if not for her markings being off, for the age her height suggested. I was just curious about. Patilii tried explaining only for Sadirsk to grab hold of her by the arm. Garibert Tokalub Kaserishok, he growled, confusion entering her expression before she could keep from it. Patilii managed to stammer. I don't. Let's find her, he cut in with a wicked sneer. His grip on her arm tightened as he dragged her off. Elsewhere, Skiz was making his way past a large area full of Yenna feasting on what he could only imagine. Serving them were several slaves. A great many of them were captured Romastican soldiers from what he could see. A few of them were sometimes pulled into the laps of a female Yenna here or there and made sport of while the Yenna ate. Knowing they would soon be freed if all went accordingly, he instead scanned the Yenna who were gathered. Most that were of lower ranks. For a while some stuck out, but none actually garnered the attention of those he sought. Turning to try for a more useful location, he was stopped by fingers tracing along his shoulder. His entire body went rigid as he could hear a rough yet strangely sultry voice remarking, Britirishal Gandafaus Jisitimbian Brauklil, whipping around to see a surprisingly lovely Yenna staring back at him. Expectantly, he was caught at the tribal ornamentation covering her. Her long black hair had been done up in an ornate braiding upon her head, complete with what could be considered bone jewelry woven through. Up and down her arms were numerous black tattoos, the likes of which only the Caver rivaled in detail. For her attire, she too wore very little, yet draped on her shoulders was a heavy mantle of hide, the edges pierced through with dangling jewels and decorations, which he recognized as likely prizes of battle, for they did not match any Yenna creation he had seen before. Catching sight of her equally detailed weapons slung upon her hip, he came to and managed, Cocking her head with a smirk, she asked, You speak Roma? Thinking quickly, Skiz replied, Roma Dita. Ah, you were taught to speak Roma then. Good, good. Useful and pleasant to my eye, she laughed. Casting her purple eyes upon him more seriously, she next asked, "Your mother found you a mate yet?" Her fingers ran along his chest while she spoke. She waited with a strangely friendly, sort of predatory smile. "Tirishal Gandalfausk, no ma'am," he quickly replied, hoping he had understood enough of the language to correctly use the honorifics. "Oh, who taught you to speak it so well? You learned the Roma manners too. Ah, yes, I will have you then." Scooping him up into her arms with a grin, she leaned in to kiss him possessively, the taste of her breath far less pleasant than her appearance. She took no notice of Skiz's discomfort when she further remarked, "I shall have to send your mother my regards for raising USA well. Perhaps if she has other sons, she'll find them simpler to send off." Elated over her new prize, she carried him off. His 115-pound frame felt like nothing in her muscular arms. She made quick work of their trip to the Caver's hut, Skiz all the while held securely in her arms like a bride. Only when they had arrived did she set him back upon his feet. Tirishal cautioned him, "Now don't you try running back to your mother. I'll have you for my pad on, even if I must hunt you to your mother's slump. Young or not, I doubt she'd give me too much trouble over having you." Grinning at him, she motioned him to follow her inside, knowing the wiser choice was to obey Skiz quietly enter the hut behind her. Already plans swirled through his mind on how he might use this turn of events to his advantage, chief among these thoughts being on how he might eliminate Tirishal, so he could move more freely once more. All such plans, though, came to a swift pause as he entered to see the Cavra standing over Bershin's restrained form. The Hikibi had each of his legs broken into multiple angles, his arms tied behind him far too tightly. It was a wonder he managed to so narrowly cling to consciousness. "Tirishal Gandalfausk, you join at this good time," the Cavra agreed upon noticing Tirishal's entrance. Turning Tirishal's way, the Cavra motioned her over. "Tell me, what you think be best done to get the Skana talking?" He tried to leave with no others to help him. "Before I even tell, he can." Approaching her Cavra, Tirishal visually examined the torn-up Hikibi and commented, "Cavra Mother, have you tried Jarl'Skana's paw?" Laughter ringing out over her words, the Cavra had to hold up her hand for silence. "I need not no advice of a Gonansk. If your sister wanna be heard, she should be not so lazy, HM. If she wants to be heard another time, she can earn being a higher Gandikvar." A few of the guards snickering over the despite Tirishal's evident displeasure. Crossing her arms, Tirishal said, "Fine, Cavra Mother then. What you need the Skana to say?" "He tell me what he send his people to say. I have slough searched and none found but fur. I think not the Skana, the type eat them. So he must send them with plan. I will know this plan they are use against me." The Cavra growled. Her foot kicked at the already groaning Hikibi. "Maybe they have not gone?" Tirishal ventured, Skiz perking up rather sharply at this voice, even though he remained otherwise unmoved, his posture still withdrawn and unobtrusive, as he'd seen with other males of the tribe. Laughing and shaking her head, the Cavra smacked Tirishal's back and answered, "You must not speak so foolish, or I may choose different from my Cav Parausk. No, why should they stay if they can escape, huh? This one trying too slow. No, they think they learned something and run like they're Chupatari." Returning her attention back to the Hikibi, she asked of Tirishal again, "What you say on how we make him talk?" Stilling her tongue on a retort despite her rougher instincts, Tirishal made to speak when Bershin managed to gasp out, "I told them." Silence followed. The Cavra growled, "What will you tell them say?" That you..." Groaning loudly from the pain, he spat out some blood and managed to attack. At last passing out, much to the Cavra's great annoyance. He never saw her foot rise up in preparation of an attack. Tirishal, however, paused her mother by saying, "The Skana is more useful if kept for later. Maybe he will remember better when let to sit with his wounds. Skana don't like pain." Visibly reconsidering, the Cavra smirked and ordered, "Take him back to the slough. Let him sit where his people left him." Bershin was dragged off. Still of no interest to anyone since a counterattack was being planned out by Tirishal and the Cavra, Skiz had found himself in a unique opportunity of observation. For while he might have liked to get Bershin away, lest they managed to wrest information from him, he couldn't do so safely. Instead, he made note of several key points. The first being that only the 5 guards, Tirishal and Jarl'Skana, carried certain patterns, which were the same as those Akavra bore on her own arm tattoos. It not being a far stretch for him to assume that given the physical similarities, only the Kavra's own daughters could serve in high positions around her, a factor which suddenly made his part in the mission much easier in the sense of knowing who to target first and foremost. Yet at last the conversation turned, and he again gave it his full attention, more so since he heard the Kavra asking, "Who that?" her finger pointing directly at him. Everyone stared at the strange little disguised Marcel. Striding over to where Skiz was standing, Tirishal gladly announced, "When it gets bigger, my pad on. Till then I'll be training him." Her hand came to rest on his shoulder. Skiz could feel her grip him a little tighter than need be in her possessiveness. A few snickers able to be heard from the sisters, though none spoke. His mother must not want waste a leaker on him. The Kavra laughed, though her eyes were well intent upon Skiz in the predatory way he had already seen from Tirishal. "I'll be sure he." Her words paused as Jarl'Skana came in. Tirishal greeted the evidently low-ranked sister. "Jarl'Skana, I was showing my be new pad on to our Kavra Mother, saying before I'll get him a good leaker Kavra Mother." Ignoring her sister for the moment, Jarl'Skana greeted the suddenly annoyed Kavra Mother. "No tracks have been discovered leading from our borders. They go only inward from what could be found." Her speech caused Skiz to pause. He knew he had not heard the Yenna speaking so well before. Yet there she was in perfect Romastican, giving her report. "Then I send others to look," the Kavra said without much surprise. Waiting until the Kavra had turned to address another of the sisters, Jarl'Skana at last answered Tirishal, "You forget. You must always speak first to our Kavra Mother." Expression softened. She cast as warm a smile as one could expect from a Yenna. "So then you have a pad on too." Her eyes narrowed upon Skiz. She looked back to Tirishal and demanded, "Where did you find this male?" Ears lowering, Tirishal slowly eased Skiz behind her and replied, "I found him wandering from the Gandafaust Tirishal. Gone ensk Jarl'Skana. Since you time ta waste. Go, Gandafaust. You have duties to yours and below. Get your rest. Gone ants. Since you think so much like my Gandafaust, you go find those tracks in my dwelling. We see if they still here," the Kavra growled. Both of the Yenna nodded to their Kavra. Tirishal quickly exited with Skiz being dragged after her. Jarl'Skana, however, was waylaid by the Kavra ordering, "You will not again talk to my Gandafaust Tirishal this moon." "As you wish, Kavra," Jarl'Skana replied before sweeping from the hut. Skiz's strange appearance still bothered Jarl'Skana as she stormed to the slump where her command awaited her. Her intent had been to dole out orders for the search to progress more quickly. Instead, she found herself paused by the strong metallic scent of blood. Pulling back her lip in distaste, she slowly peeled back the flap. A wave of unpleasant aromas hitting her with her entry, she found herself greeted with a gory display. Noticing a pair of female Yenna under her command staring at the scene, she demanded with a growl, "What happened here?" "Don't know Jarl'Skana Gandagansk," the left of the two replied. "Someone went out to teach back, though," the right added. Her thumb pointed back behind them to where a drip trail of blood led out the rear of the large communal dwelling. "Then get out and keep watch. I'm going to get a look at this mess," Jarl'Skana directed with a light growl, her attention not given any mind to her subordinates. She stood back and examined the scene. On the ground, Sadirsk was entangled with what almost looked like a Yenna on the cusp of the womanly change. However, her fur pattern seemed too mature for her age. Neither had on their clothing on. She did not need to guess hard at Sadirsk's possible plan, since she doubted the other had been the aggressor. From what she could tell, they had been in a struggle with Sadirsk, having been holding the smaller female by a broken neck. Her hand bloodied in what had been a bad grip on her weapon, hilt still buried in Sadirsk. A spear tip also protruding from the front of his neck. Scruffing waist, Jarl'Skana muttered. Her foot nudged the massive brute just enough to see where the spear shaft had broken off. Raising her brow and crouching beside the deceased, she pulled the small Yenna out from under him. The false tail flopped unnaturally. "Ugh, Knew I should have disposed of him soon. Words breaking off into a faint growl, she for the first time noticed a false muzzle falling away from the delicate strapaw features. Standing back up with no further regard for either of the dead Jarl'Skana, scanned the room further. All about weapons had been scattered and bloodied. Whoever had fought against the Jarl'Skana other than the Romastican left behind was likely severely wounded. For while indeed the dark crimson trail was an indication the bone weapons had fur and flesh, not just that of Yenna upon them, suddenly turning on her heel, she rushed from the hut only in passing, ordering of the two she had assigned to wait outside. Gather the others. Have them await me. All you clean that mess while idle. Heeding no reply, she made her way swiftly through the village to Tirashol's private dwelling, and hoped she wasn't too late. Her path filled with the internalized berating of her own lack of notice. She could not believe she had missed how obvious it was. Those missing Romasticans, as she suspected, had not departed. They were still within the village, one of which was likely with her sister at that very moment. Self-abasement turning to disbelief in her sister's lack of attention, she made to enter her sister's hut when she was stopped by the command of another of her siblings. "Why, you think you be doing Entans're?" Whipping back Jarl'Skana, glared at the Yenna, who dare be decorated above her rank. "None of your interest, Jarl'Skana. Now leave me," Jarl'Skana growled. "Nah, you ta no see, she's ta ave arrest, or sar modise," Jarl'Skana replied with a smirk. Her hands came to rest upon her rather shapely hips. "And you ta speak to me with respect, Entans're. I'm your greater by F.A." Jarl'Skana mocked. "I haven't time for you, Jarl'Skana," Jarl'Skana said with a sneer as she turned to enter Tirashol's hut. "You had better ave time. You a duty ta do, or do you no listen to our Kavramota like you do ta your betters?" Jarl'Skana challenged. Glaring at her impertinent sister, Jarl'Skana replied, "I'm performing that duty." Her hand threw back the curtain of thick leather to see Tirashol lying upon her bed of hides within. Beside her, Skiz was sleeping, cuddled up, though still fully covered with his loin. "What you think you doin'?" Jarl'Skana snarled, moving to intercept her slightly smaller sister. Inspiration catching her at seeing Tirashol beginning to stir from the noise outside, Jarl'Skana loudly replied, "I'm addressing my superior regarding an urgent matter that doesn't concern you or Padong's Jiao." "How do you speak to me so?" Jarl'Skana cried, her rage at once bringing Tirashol from her slumber. Glad to see the bait taken, Jarl'Skana threw back her head haughtily and replied, "I speak easily, Jiao, or do you want to make a challenge?" Her lip pulling back to bare her fangs, she could see Jarl'Skana quiver ever so slightly. "I outtrank ya." She at last shot back, only to have Tirashol come out to address the commotion. "What do you think you're doing out here squabbling like a runt, Jarl'Skana?" she growled. Jumping at the sound of Tirashol's voice, Jarl'Skana quickly explained, "I was ta make sure you was botad by this Jian." A slight sneer sent to her completely calm Jarl'Skana as she continued, "Kavramota's Ordas." "Why?" Tirashol's eyes narrowed dangerously at Jarl'Skana as she asked. "Sa she can't turn you try to like." Gulping and taking a step back, Jarl'Skana found herself unable to continue under the heat of Tirashol's glare. "You would dare come to my dwell and speak a traitor's Jiao. Get from my sight before I rend you and move our sister higher," Tirashol snarled. Jarl'Skana meanwhile stood back with a smirk with her arms crossed over her heavy chest smugly. "I'm supposed ta." Jarl'Skana began only to be cut off. "Be silent, Gansuk Jarl'Skana." Jarl'Skana interrupted much to Jarl'Skana's distress and confusion. "I didn't come here to hear you speak. I came to warn Tirashol Gandalfausk about Tirashol Gandalfausk. Entans're Jarl'Skana. Gansuk Jarl'Skana. Some Kavramota want ya." A male Yenna interrupted to inform the group. None of the three sisters pleased. It was Jarl'Skana who first raged. "Why? Did you no speak of me by my rank, Oaklil?" "Because he knows we're worth lies," Tirashol replied with a smirk before addressing her brother to ask, "Oklalasis, what does Kavramota want us for?" "Not Ephomita speak," their brother replied with a shrug before motioning them to follow. Taking the lead with a flourish of her long, unbraided hair, Jarl'Skana haughtily strode on ahead of the group of siblings. Oklalasis took up the rear since none of his sisters were giving any trouble. Tirashol being thus in the middle with Jarl'Skana, trying move to her sister's side only for Tirishal to silently shake her head. Jarl'Skana, unwilling to actually go against the Cavra's orders by speaking directly to her favorite sister, though she did look back to see Skiz watching them from the hut entry. Catching her sister's line of sight, Tirishal motioned the disguised shade to follow along as well. Tirishal's dwelling was hardly any distance from the Cavra's. It did not take long for the small group of 5 to reach and enter the grand hut. Jarl'Skana at once upon entering hurried to her mother's side. The mid-ranked officer that she was being quick to announce for her mother. Jan Jaska was trying ta. I already know you failed ta keep your gone aunt's sister from nearing Tirishal Gandalfausk. The Cavra growled for all to hear. The remaining 4 sisters guarded their mother. All sneered at a very flustered Jarl'Skana. I tried ta. Jarl'Skana started to defend. Trying's not good enough, the Cavra interrupted sharply as she glared at Jarl'Skana. Don't earn you any right to speak low of Gonen's Jarl'Skana neither. Shrinking back to stand a ways off, Jarl'Skana much more humbly replied, Yes, Cavra Moda. Turning her glare upon Jarl'Skana, the Cavra demanded, Why you disobey me, Gonen's Jarl'Skana? I did no such thing, Cavra Mother. If Gansuk Jarl'Skana could actually hear past her ornaments Tirishal, too can speak such. I only ever spoke to Gansuk Jarl'Skana. Jarl'Skana calmly replied. Turning only her eyes back upon Jarl'Skana, she growled, The true? Yet Cavra Moda, Jarl'Skana answered with surprising meekness for Yenna. Then why you there? The Cavra again demanded of Jarl'Skana. Cavra Mother, I found proof those Romasticans never left, and I think Tirishal is on her side now. Jarl'Skana answered. Her eyes shifted to where Skiz stood rigidly, but steadfast. The Marshal, if anything, appeared even less threatening and unobtrusive, laughing so loudly at the great jest that even her guards were drowned out. The Cavra cried, I tabi told this week lookin' run a Roma? Nah, not S.A. Speaking through the laughter, Jarl'Skana strongly ventured. Then what would it hurt to check? Surely Tirishal is curious now, too. Smirking, the Cavra did not have much pause before replying. Nah. I think since USA worried you want him F.O. yourself. Motioning Skiz to her, the Cavra watched him approach slowly like the skittish Yenna male he pretended to be. You know, see this? He S.A. cowardly male as any. She pulled Skiz the rest of the way to her and onto her lap. She turned his head this way and that before deciding. I see it for myself, huh? He stay with me. Tirishal Gandalfausk can ave him back when I done. A triumphant grin covered her muzzle as she waved off Tirishal, Jarl'Skana, and Jarl'Skana from her sight. Fists flexing, Jarl'Skana swept from the Cavra's presence with Tirishal closely followed after her. Jarl'Skana skulked out last of all. What did you do that for? Tirishal demanded once they had exited the hut. Raising her brow at her sister's rage, Jarl'Skana motioned to the simpler tattoo of her arm. Her gaze kept an eye upon Jarl'Skana from her peripheral to be sure the unwelcome sibling was departing. Ah, so you hide behind Cavra Mother rather than answer me, huh? Tirishal growled. Snarling, Jarl'Skana replied from under her breath. I hide from no one, but you will not lose your right for being thought a traitor, Tirishal Gandalfausk. Then I order you to come with me. You don't have ta speak ta do that. Tirishal commanded, much to her sister's amusement. Leading the way to the hut in which Bershin was captive, Tirishal entered with Jarl'Skana, taking up the rear. What this? Jarl'Skana inquired upon seeing the passed-out Hakibi. He won't live long. No need ta waste your time pretending with this Roma, Tirishal said. Her foot rolled Hakibi over so the rapidly spreading infection on his neck could be seen. The very same spot in which he had been pricked by the Yenna blade during his initial meeting with the Cavra. Then why bring me to him? Jarl'Skana asked, though a knowing smile could just be made out upon her features. He might be able to answer you about your concerns. Didn't want to answer Martha, though. Tirishal smirked. Crouching down beside Bershin, Jarl'Skana could hear his breath coming out in ragged gasps, the swelling of his neck cutting off much of the air to his lungs. I doubt he'll tell me much. If I'd gotten to him sooner, maybe. But you're right. He won't live long from that wound. Who cut him? Jarl'Skana's finger pulled back the eyelid to see Bershin's gaze wander unseeing while she spoke. Crossing her arms when the annoyed growled, Tirishal replied, One of our sisters, no doubt. Nodding and standing back up, Jarl'Skana muttered, You'd best keep watch. If I'm right about that male, he's one of those this Roma brought in. There's no chance. I would have seen if he were anything but Yenna. So would our Mother. Tirishal defended. Is that why Sadirsk was taken down, holding a Roma maid to look Yenna? Jarl'Skana shot back as her temper rose. Shocked, Tirishal exclaimed. Wah! Sadirsk? I never figured him for being made meat by any but you. Her speech losing to her accent in her shock at the news. Her lip pulling back from her fangs, Jarl'Skana growled. If they made meat of him, it's probably another Roma trick, since our Kavra mother decided to cheat me in my battle with their leader. Punching the wall to leave a gaping hole in mud and fiber construction, she snarled. Either you believe me or you don't. I will find those Romas, so their leader can see their hides upon me in battle. Turning from Tirishal and making for the exit, she added, I will not be dishonored in my own dwell, let alone by anyone else, be they Kavra or not. Pausing Jarl'Skana with a hand upon her arm, Tirishal demanded, Why did you say nothing to the Kavra? Would you permit others know your dwell were invaded, Tirishal? Jarl'Skana replied from over her shoulder before stalking off. Behind her, Tirishal stood in stunned silence. She never before had seen such brashness in her normally calculative and tactically minded sibling. As she thought more on the matter, Jarl'Skana had always been the most level-headed. And were it not for her lack of interest in being Kavra, she would have been the best choice to lead after their mother. It was those qualities, in fact, that had led the younger sister to seek Jarl'Skana's advice and wisdom so often. The pair had become close allies against other sisters as the elder groomed Tirishal to lead, shaking her head as she ventured forth. Though unlike Jarl'Skana, she had not the choice of action, for she was well aware of her need for rest before meeting the coming battle. The only consolation was being that investigations were in the most capable hands she knew of, even if she could not imagine how a Romastican could disguise themselves well enough to pass for Yenna. The day had advanced well into the evening as Jarl'Skana returned to the dwelling she shared with those 30 of her command. Gladly she found them all awaiting her, some chatting, some resting, but all attentive to when she walked and they ceased their activities at once to give her their full attention. Letting her gaze fall to where the dirt was still patched in the dark brown rust of old blood, she returned her attention to her people. If Linthier and Tirishal haven't already told you, you should have guessed by cleaning up Sadirsk and the Roma spy there are more. Our task is to find them. There should be 3 left, maybe 2. Sadirsk wasn't brought down by some Roma with a broken neck. There already is the one these 4 spies arrived with captured and dying in the hut they've been sent to buy our Kavra. You will speak loudly of this during your searches to each other, or any you feel the opportunity. 2 of you, she paused to point out her selection as she continued, will wait within the slough with the captive. Stay out of sight and silent. Any who enters will be questioned. The muzzle on the spy Sadirsk killed was not her face. Let that guide your interrogations. You'll be changed later with 2 more. Growling softly, she crossed her arms to hide her clenching fists and went on. What happened within our dwelling will not be spoken of. Sadirsk is meat and the spy is gone. Once all spies have been captured, I will wear their hides into battle, but until then they will serve other uses. Grinning dangerously, she noticed one of her male troops wished to speak. Nodding for him to take his ground, he stood up. What is it, Entans're? She asked with a faint smile. Jarl'Skana Gandik for any other features we should look for in our search, he respectfully inquired. Smirking, Jarl'Skana nodded and answered, They will be smaller like any other Roma, like Yenna runts as well, so don't let them by just because they look like runts. Catching sight of no one else with any questions, she gave her final words. Get to your tasks and be on your watch. Even injured, they still brought Sadirsk to the dirt. Be it that they lost 1, 2, or more, they made sure he isn't wasting my time any further. I don't want to hear any other of my command being killed by sneaking Romas. Motioning Entans're to her Jarl'Skana, left without waiting for him to catch up, her intent to nip at the bud her risk of further treasonous murmurings. For within the Yenna language the shortening of words denotes ranges of importance. Further with those of her command, indeed, placed her too high. It presented a large risk should the wrong ears hear it. Entans're, I know you and the others mean me respect, but you are to keep your words short when speaking of me. I earned the title of Gonansk, not Gandaforansk. I have worked too long to keep my rank as it is, and prefer to keep that way until Tirashal has earned her place. Only then will I rise to earn my right as the next Gandalfausk. Jarl'Skana quietly said while the two of them walked, her eyes always keenly alert for any out at this late hour. You know full well the rules of our language. None of you are to forget them either, regardless if we must speak the simple Romastican, so as to always know what they speak of. Is that understood? Jarl'Skana explained. Nodding his head, Kothshir humbly replied, Yes, Jarl'Skana Gonans, I shall respect your wishes, and pass along your words. Patting him on the back with a heavy thump, Jarl'Skana praised, You are worthy of more than you being male gains you. If you ever want, I'll keep you from being taken, as a mate if you ever need it. Grinning at her subordinate, she motioned him to accompany her on the hunt for the missing shades. Thank you, Jarl'Skana Gonans. That is good to hear and know, Kothshir replied as he followed after his commander. Yenna village shakily slinking from a small hut which stood near the Caver's own, Tilkier peeked about and hurried in the shadow of two other dwellings, his breath fighting to come fast as he closed his eyes and slipped a small vial into the empty space of his false tail. Failing to see another approaching, he gasped in a muffled squeak when a hand clamped over his mouth. Quiet, Tilkier. What happened? Skiz asked as his hand came away from the panicked Strapaw. Grasping his chest with a nervous motion, Tilkier managed to calm himself enough to answer. I just got rid of one. I had to use an entire bottle on her, though, so I'm already out of poison. She tried to. Shuddering, he held his arm and blushed, the dyes managing to hide from sight most of the radiating hue change. Worry about that later. Have you seen Deloria? Skiz's expression contained such a ferocious seriousness, it startled Tilkier from his concerns. And no, Skiz. I haven't seen her since last we're all together. Gulping at the way it caused Skiz to draw into himself, Tilkier ventured to ask, Why? Did something happen? Did they discover us? No, Skiz replied, his hand steadying Tilkier, though when I was with the Cavra, she received word that one of their Yenna and Patilii were found dead. Seeing the startled reaction, he gave Skiz inwardly groaned and hurried on. You need to find Deloria if you can. I will take care of the other Yenna. I know where to look better than you do. All right, Skiz. I'll find her. Wait, how did you end up with the Cav Dash? Tilkier started. Cutting him off, Skiz quick replied, I'll tell you about it later. For now, get going. I know at least one suspects us. Not wishing for Tilkier to be distracted again, Skiz hurried off to continue his bloody work. Thanks to Tilkier, he already had one less who would wait come morning. Wishing to find out more, Tilkier sighed and turned to go the other way. The path he followed about to take him again into the open, he paused and listened. Not far off, he could just make out two voices speaking in their rough way about a prisoner. Ears perking, he slipped closer, just in time to hear mention about the hut they had gathered in earlier. Grinning as in his mind was spinning with how he might make Skiz proud, he hurried off through the shadows. His silent step swift and agile, he ran with a grace despite his otherwise awkward demeanor, and was soon at his destination. Casting about for the first time since he had set off, he was relieved to see the hut unguarded, figuring it due to the Yenna probably being asleep on their post since their intelligence had indicated they were prone to the laziness. He quietly stole into the hut. Confusion his first greeting, he could see thanks to the moon shining. Through holes in the roof that Bershin was completely still. Even his chest didn't rise in the way Tilkier had been expecting. Gulping nervously and creeping forward, he never noticed a pair of eyes watching him from behind. His mind far too focused upon the deathly still Akibi. Touching his quivering hand upon Bershin's shoulder, he could not help but gasp at finding only cold stiffness. Recoiling, he turned to flee and was met with a grinning visage of two towering female Yenna. That didn't take long, huh? The one on the left snickered much to her companion's equal amusement. Nah, sho didn't. The other agreed. Reaching out to nab Tilkier, she was caught by surprise when Strapaw ducked and dodged a dart from the hut, his false tail being caught by the other. He could hear her growl in frustration as it came off in her hand. Unable to help a brief smile, he hazarded a glance back and ran smack dab into the two coming forward to relieve the others. Falling back on his rear, He squeaked and tried to again evade. This time, however, without success. He only rolled under the foot of one of the new arrivals. Pinning him down, she leered down at him and commented, "Well, Tegan Ents will be glad fare this on," whimpering as he was pulled roughly from the ground. His last conscious sight was a fist flying toward him before all went dark. Yenna village forcing himself to trust in Tilkie's ability to find Deloria. Skiz did his best to dismiss it from his mind any doubts about their safety. All effort instead focusing upon the numbers, in which he had not yet touched upon. He knew the Cavra and the 5 daughters he had seen guarding her during the day were gone by his hand. Tilkie had taken care of another, that left Tirishal, Jarl'Skana, and another 2 he had seen come and go while the Cavra had kept him by her side. The last 2 having been a small child who was being cared for by a wet nurse, as well as another child a little older, and thus none of his concern. Though he knew, too, there were some sons from the look of things. Granted that it had been Deloria and Petiliai's end, Petiliai coming unbidden to mind, he again tried to dismiss her as a concern for later, instead opting to hope Deloria was picking up the slack. He being as clueless as a Cavra to the full details surrounding the cause of Petiliai's untimely end. His information had, of course, come from what he heard at the Cavra's side before she had dismissed everyone for the night. Finally managing to lose himself to the mission, once more he crept into Tirishal's dwelling, his gaze already searching for a ready weapon when he heard a cry call out. Cursing himself for losing the hour, he spun around to leave when he was seized from behind. "Where do you think you're going?" came Tirishal's sleep-husky voice. Mind going fast on possible responses, Skiz nervously turned and meekly replied, "I did want to wake you again to Faust Tirishal." Waking up by the moment with the cries of outrage going on outside Tirishal's eyes narrowed, and she demanded, "How did you get away from Cavra Mother?" Blessedly not having come up with an answer, Skiz was saved when a female, Yenna burst in, "Cav Paragan to Faust Tirishal. I not trying ta bota, but thar's problem." "What is it? What is going on?" Tirishal demanded, Skiz for the moment forgotten. "Cavra and many Gandy for meat. They dead," the Yenna struggled to say in the Romastican language. Growling, Tirishal cast a glare at Skiz and ordered, "You come with me. I'll see what you say later after I find out about this." Nodding for the other Yenna to lead the way, she chased after. Her hand, as an afterthought, took hold of Skiz's upper arm and dragged him along. Barely keeping up with her long, hurried stride, Skiz found himself led out into a scene of chaos. Fights could be seen breaking out all about the area, with those of Jarl'Skana's command trying to subdue the looting and frantic populace, most of the fighting being between the larger females. Skiz did take notice of a few males sneaking about to either get out of the way or gather things while their louder counterparts were busy. In the midst of it all was Jarl'Skana barking orders and beating down a few females who hoped to gain a higher position in the fray. Jarl'Skana gone Ents. Tirishal called, fast approaching her sister, with Skiz still in tow. Punching down another upstart, Jarl'Skana looked up upon hearing her name, her expression for a brief moment one of utmost relief from catching sight of her beloved younger sister. "What has happened?" Tirishal demanded. Her presence started to cause the other Yenna to quiet down and look her way, though most remained at their squabbles. Spitting on the ground angrily, Jarl'Skana snarled, "Our Cavra mother is dead along with most of our sisters. Somehow that wastes Jistalka's still breath, but is even more useless than before. It's up to you to lead now. I still need to hunt down the remaining Skana. Already I have one. Where's that Scaroma?" Tirishal snarled back, never noticing Skiz slip from her grasp to mingle into the crowd behind her. Less than pleased to see the attention, they rapidly drew Jarl'Skana quickly said, "You must get them under your command, Cav Tirishal. Not worry about that now. Those of mine will serve you as loyally as they do me. Already yours come running." "Then you must be at my side, Jarl'Skana Gandalfausk," Tirishal replied firmly. Turning before her elder sister could speak, Tirishal proclaimed, "Bricab Tirishal tenthel fantel burin euthania yen gist inker yen gistri ruma yen palaska roma yen ICDWA scaroma yen tuaton." Chest swelling with pride over her sister's strong battle speech, Jarl'Skana could still feel the itch to move. Only her duty to her sister kept her from doing so. She began to resign herself to instead scan the cheering crowd. Her keen scrutiny felt almost unneeded until she recalled her sister's recent acquisition. Shifting her gaze back to find the small male absent, she motioned one of those under her command over. Quickly whispering something to them, she departed to see about tying up the loose ends for her sister's new reign. Behind her, martial spirits were ignited, the throngs of Yenna raising their weapons high and chanting, "Cav Tirishal! Cav Tirishal!" over and over. A frenzy began to take them, as their energy was near tangibly felt. Harnessing the energy before it consumed her, people Tirishal ordered, "Yenyaskal, Yenyit Esenyar Riska Roma," Sunri Notsi. At her order for weapons to be gathered, the assembled Yenna all scattered, excluding Tirishal and Jarl'Skana's personal troops. Whipping around fiercely, Tirishal made the demand again the spy's location, but found instead her sister gone. One of Jarl'Skana's command stepped forward to speak on her commander's behalf. They were cut off by Tirishal's stern glare. "I'll hear what she has to say herself." The new Cavra said sternly before motioning two of her personal followers to her. "Bring me my weapons. I won't be wasting time once my Yenna return. We charge without delay," Tirishal snarled. "Cavra." The females replied in excited unison before hurrying for her dwelling. Finding at last a moment to herself despite her entourage, Tirishal could not help but lightly reflect upon her diminished kin. Could there have been any chance they might have avoided their fates? No. Her mother's pride had surely blinded her to whatever threat had claimed her in so dishonorable a way, just as how Jarl'Skana's swiftness to follow her own ideas had led their mother to think so little of her. It was no secret that Jarl'Skana was deemed lazy for her lack of obvious ambition, even if Tirishal had been made privy to what her elder sister hid from the others. Tirishal herself, after all, had climbed to the rank of highest in command under her mother, despite being one of the younger born. In no small thanks to Jarl'Skana's aid at that. Despite this, her sister was off chasing after the underhanded assassins who had stolen into the village, and so disrupted them all. Likely, it seemed to Tirishal, they would be long gone lest they be discovered, and it seemed to her that it was unlikely her sister's search would bring any yield. Absently taking back her weapon when at last it was brought forth, she took note that her people were beginning to trickle back in. Dismissing her prior musings, she again shaped her mindset into one meant for battle, and began to formulate instead her speech, the words drowning out all other misgivings of the events at hand. Yenna village, making use of everyone's distraction to his distinct advantage, Skiz hurried through the village, much like the Yenna around him. His purpose, though, to find the shade Jarl'Skana had alluded to. At last, hearing above the din of voices, someone cried out. At once recognizing Tilkier, he hurried his steps until he came to a large structure like those which had been noted to hold Yenna troops. Knowing better than to blindly rush forward, he crept up and pulled a flap just enough to peek inside. Much like with the trap set for Tilkier, on either side stood two burly female Yenna, as well as by an exit on the far end. In the center was Tilkier himself, with a female Yenna standing over his bound form. No longer in full disguise, the false muzzle and tail had been tossed carelessly aside. Prosthetics not the only articles to leave him bare. His loincloth, too, had been removed and torn, so as to be tied tightly about his wrists. Steadying himself with a deep breath, Skiz took firm hold of the hide curtain and flung it inward. Hand again free, he pulled the dagger he had begun his mission with and rushed forward. His lithe form flitted in such a way as to shame Tilkier's graceful sprint. Skiz weaved his way past the first two guards, their surprise clear as they took a moment to recover, as did the other three. Once fully aware, they all began converging on the daring Marcel. Ducking under a blow only to hear a growl, he knew the punch had hit one of his other would-be assailants. "Skiz!" Tilkier cried in alarm at recognizing his team leader. Giving no reply, Skiz again swerved in his chase about the hut, so that the Yenna giving pursuit were forced to collide. Taking the new chance, since two were going for weapons, he turned and made straight for Tilkier. Grabbing up the strapaw swiftly, he pulled him along. The strapaw at first not quite moving of his own volition until he spotted Jarl'Skana enter the hut. Eyes going wide, he jumped and sped his steps to such a degree that Skiz found himself near being the one dragged despite the bindings holding the strapaw's arms. Swiftly dashing away, and between the much more deserted residential structures, the pair could hear shouts and calls of the coordinating pursuit. Thankfully, with the efforts to get ready for their charge, the Yenna appeared undermanned. With the hope in their minds, Skiz stopped Tilkier and quietly peeked inside a nearby dwelling. Finding none within, he pulled the strapaw in, and at last let go to sheath his weapon. "I'm so sorry, Skiz. I heard they'd caught one of us, but when I went to—" Tilkier tried to explain, holding up his hand for the strapaw's silence. Skiz cut in. "I'll worry about that when you get in your report. For right now, are you able to escape if I give you the chance?" W. Wait. "What about you? Aren't you going to get out too?" Tilkier's wide blue-gray eyes pleaded with his martial leader and friend. "Mind on the mission, Tilkier," Skiz answered. His form already moved to keep a watch on what was going on outside. Sighing and nodding, Tilkier dejectedly agreed. "I should be able to make it." "Good. Wait here and stay hidden. You'll know when it's time to come back out." Silently, Skiz slipped from the hut much to Tilkier's immense unease. Blending with those few straggling Yenna on their way back to their cavera, Skiz found the Yenna closely crowded around Tirishal. The new leader so densely surrounded that he could not make out any part of her through all the thickly muscled bodies. Watching from the back along with several other males, all younger and about his height, he listened to the speech being made in the native Yenna tongue. Following the others and cheering at the correct times with the mob, it was not hard to gather from the building frenzy that Tirishal was leading them verbally. When he could at last spot her, she was heading in his direction through the amassed hyenas, her eyes unseeing of the marshal until she was upon him. She at last took notice and gave a faint smirk. Tirishal's hand shot out to grab him as she pulled him along lest a wave of following Yenna swallow him up. In the lead by her side, Skiz marched onward toward where he knew Commander Lefindra and the Romastican army awaited him. Quietly, Tirishal commented to him, "Didn't think you'd be back after Jarl'Skana accused you of being one of those spies." "Heh, guess you aren't since you're here. Don't worry about her, though. I have her taken aside. We'll crush those Romasticans for what they've done." The last of her words said with a growl. She just as quickly cast him a smirking glance and added, "Now that I'm Cavra, can even make sure you'll be knowing what I'll want from you as a pad-on." Noticing for first time the bone dagger he had tucked into his cloth, she remarked, "You plan to do battle with that? Could your Mother give nothing better to the future pad-on of the Cavra?" Shaking her head and laughing, she turned to one of those of her personal command and ordered, "You have an extra. Give it to this male of mine. His Mother is making extra beds in her slough." The somewhat smaller female snickered, while passing to Skiz the shorter of her two swords. The marshal had to quickly compensate for the 50 pounds of weapon being dropped into his hands. "There, now you shall survive to be my pad-on," Tirishal said appreciatively. Giving his arm a possessive squeeze, she released him and strode forward to the village edge. Raising her jagged bone blade high above her head, she made to cry out their charge when Skiz took his chance to strike. Jumping upon the knee she had extended when taking her battle stance, he scaled her highly muscled frame and drove his new sword down into her neck inward towards her chest. The dense muscle caught the weapon before he could thrust it more than a foot. Knowing the damage was done, he jumped away and began tearing off up the hill before she could react beyond gurgling a cry of rage. Behind him, the Yenna army followed in blind rage with those who had seen and obedience for those who had not. Tirishal took up the charge's lead after she had torn the bloody blade from her neck, some still buried within her flesh from where it had broken off. She carried the gory and broken weapon in her once free hand. Wet, rasping intakes of breath met everyone's ears as she was functioning upon pure adrenaline while her life drained away. Forcing himself onward, Skiz sprinted as fast as he could. The stretch caused his breath to come out in puffs of thin white in the chilled spring air. He at last stopped to gaze upon the oncoming horde upon reaching the hill's peak. From his rear on the opposite of the ridge, the Romastican army swelled forth to pour down in a glorious charge of their vengeful forces. Soldiers of well over 1,000 strong crashed down upon the Yenna horde, and while normally the Yenna might have fought back, and even likely won, they could only stare in silent horror when Commander Fetchirda, Lefindra himself, rode out ahead of his men. His saber gleamed as it struck downward to sever Tirishal's head from her shoulders. Her stunned expression rolled off to bounce back down the hill, as though fleeing to the village below. From where he stood, Skiz could see the Yenna easily being cut down among those who recovered enough to fight back. For those who did not, however, they were rounded up and restrained. Here and there one would regain their nerve, only to be silenced. Though strangely it appeared to Skiz that without their leaders the others were unable to fight effectively. That at least seemed to be the case, until from across the field came a mighty war cry. All eyes turned that way as Skiz could make out Jarl'Skana, and those of her command thundering along the ridge. Fresh energy surged into the subdued Yenna. They rose and began to engage the Romasticans. Only Jarl'Skana's group armed and unchained. They cut through scores of Romastican soldiers, while the other Yenna beat, kicked, and headbutted anything to aid the struggle. Shifting his eyes swiftly back to where Commander Lefindra had dismounted to attend to the sudden battle, he was relieved to find no concern required. The Yenna, despite their last effort, were still no match with most of their numbers in chains, and being quickly outdone. It was only on the front in which Jarl'Skana waged did the Romasticans find their numbers being slaughtered rather heavily. Her warriors were better trained than Skiz had ever expected, and moved with precision not unlike the soldiers of Commander Lefindra's command. The one highest drawback even to such excellence was soon proven when their numbers became the focal point of the Romastican force. Other Yenna contained as they were able to give more attention to the less than 30 of Jarl'Skana's command. Many Romasticans were down in the attempt, but at last Jarl'Skana and hers were finally brought low. On Commander Lefindra's orders, they were tightly chained among the different Yenna and forced to be seated. Approaching Commander Lefindra, when matters were again secure, Skiz formally greeted him. "Commander Lefindra, congratulations on a campaign well fought, sir." Turning to see the marshal, who had lost his prosthetics but not the dyes from his fur, Commander Lefindra smiled warmly and remarked, "Those spots do not suit you, Skitsapakhuzi. You could do to wash them off after such service to your empire. I shall win able Commander Lefindra. However, I have come to inform you that my report awaits your review upon your leisure. Should you have no other duties to assign me at this time, I also request permission to retrieve Tilkier from the village below, sir." Skiz explained. Raising his brow at the odd numbers alluded to Commander, Lefindra asked, "What are the others of your group?" "Dead and unknown, sir. Even on our front, the Yenna proved more formidable than expected." Hiding away his shame behind a mask of duty, Skiz betrayed none of his emotions to his commander. "No need. I require you to ride back to Romastica and inform Emperor Leondios of our imminent arrival, once the savages have been made ready to transport. I shall have all other matters here attended to." The woven commander, Ordred, saluting Commander Lefindra, Skiz awaited the nod of dismissal before turning and making for where the Chupataris were kept. Along his path, he could see the wounded being tended to, many of them bearing gashes from the brutal bone weapons the Yenna wielded. Turning away, those of his own small group entered unbidden to his thoughts. Patilii was for sure dead, Deloria was missing, and Tilkier captured. Even he had come close to his mission being ended before completion. For while alone with the Cavra when she had dismissed her guard, he had indeed been discovered. Were it not for a strange quirk of Yenna pride, he too might have entirely failed his mission. It seemed that once the discovery was made while he was still within her grasp, she had not wished it to be discovered that Jarl'Skana had at all been correct. It had been his only saving grace that she had simply tied him to her throne so as to decide his fate. It was during that time of distraction that he had worked loose his bindings, and thus found the salvation of his mission in her death. Forcing his thoughts from himself lest he become distracted, Skiz found the Chupataris, and was met with one set aside for his journey. Jumping atop the lovely steed, it was not hard for him to guess at Commander Lefindra's involvement in its procurement for him. The Chupatari was strong and agile, with its head topped by a set of branching horns, which marked it as perhaps even one of Lefindra's personal herd. Patting the creature's neck affectionately, he took the reins and sped off in the southern direction of Romastica. Near the defeated Yenna village, one of the Romastican soldiers ran up to the woven commander to give his report. "Commander Lefindra, we have found the Yenna children and brought them as per your orders," Zephyricius reported. Seeing he had gained Commander Lefindra's attention, he continued, "We captured several Yenna who had attempted to aid in concealing the young as well. They cost us a small number of men, but because of their evident lack of fitness for battle, they were not nearly a threat. In our scouring of the village, we have also successfully freed many men originally thought lost. They've been serving under forced enslavement by those. His face contorted in disdain before continuing, "Spot tails, sir. How many of the pups are old enough to be aware of what is happening?" Lefindra asked. His gaze returned to where the Yenna were being seated in chain lines. "Not many. Most are likely over 2 cycles. Even those tried fighting us. The wretched little droppings." The Tychrian sniffed dismissively. He, much like the multitude who had withstood the Yenna, could no longer disguise their collective disdain for remaining in the foreign lands. Hiding his displeasure at the further losses, the commander turned away to seemingly watch the new prisoners being brought before the gathered Yenna. Composure unblemished, he addressed those in front of him. "Then they will not join us for the trip back to the Empire. Only keep those young enough to pose no threat. We shall see if removed from such savagery they might grow into proper citizens," the commander directed. Managing to smirk, despite the rigidness of his beak, the Tychrian saluted. "I shall see to it once," he replied. Unable to blame the Tychrian for his morbid exuberance, Lefindra continued to survey the beaten Yenna. Almost all held their heads low from their defeat, yet he could already tell the few which would become an issue if given half a chance. Deciding it was time to make an example of the prisoners to understand, he descended down the hill toward where his prisoners had been gathered near his army's encampment. Stepping smartly through his men, he motioned several archers follow while he passed, thus amassing a small retinue of men by the time he reached his goal. Directing them to either side of himself in even numbers, he turned to address the gathered Yenna. "Romastica is victorious. You have been completely defeated. It would be best for all Yenna to remember this as you enter your lives as slaves of the glorious Romastican Empire. While in these lands you have exhibited a savagery which will be met with complete intolerance from here on. This does not mean death. We have ways to make you pay far worse than death. So, should any Romastican be forced to bear further examples of your brutish nature, you will be swiftly dealt with. And if I so decide, continue to pay for your actions long after." Choosing out one of the Yenna who seemed liable to cause a problem, he gave the motion command of execution. Archers drew their bows to swiftly fire their volley with deadly accuracy, much to the Yenna's further discomfort. Proceeding with his speech commander, Lefindra recommenced with the statement, "Let this be witness to my assurance of my resolve." Seeing that none dared look away, be of horror, fascination, or contempt, he went on, "Should even such deterrence as death be ineffectual in quelling your barbaric ways, I have taken the liberty of capturing your young. They will be He started to continue when he was interrupted. "They be better meat than scruff by Jarl'Skana." One of the Yenna growled from amidst the bound mob, their words bringing swift jeers from many mixed within. Unable to select out the specific offenders, Lefindra held back his desire to show disgust with the disgraceful tribe. However, since resources cannot and will not be spared upon weak or useless slaves, the woven commander added, this time directed his archers towards a crippled Yenna who had been protecting the children. "Loose?" Arrows at once flew forth into each of those he had chosen. Their massive bodies collapsed into lifeless heaps. It was not hard to see the harsh effect it had upon many a Yenna spirit. Pleased yet surprised by the mournful air which absorbed the Yenna over the death of what he had figured weak members of the tribe, he stored away his curiosity for the moment. Instead elected to give the order that the Yenna be positioned for transport. Turning, he strode it away, pleased with the day, as he went to review Skiz's report.